Yeehaw, we're off. Hi, guys.
Tom Horn and Chris Putnam.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. Another Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministry. And here now is Brother Jerry.
Beginning today and continuing through Wednesday, you'll hear about a prophecy regarding the last Roman Catholic Pope. Brother Noah Hutchings welcomes co-authors of a new book entitled Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here, to the program. They are Dr. Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. You've heard Brother Tom on past broadcasts. He's a prolific author, a book publisher, and former pastor. Brother Chris is a respected theologian and apologist. Here's Brother Hutchings and his guest, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. Gentlemen, it's good to have you with us today. Dr. Horn.
Well, always a pleasure, of course, Noah, to be on with you on the Southwest Radio Ministries. And what a pleasure to also get to be with my good friend, Chris Putnam.
Brother Chris, I said, now where are you from? And I know you did tremendous work on this book and other books also.
Well, thank you very much, Noah. It's an honor to be here. I flew in from Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a pleasure to be here in Oklahoma with you.
Thank you very much. Now, this book that you and Dr. Horn have written, you didn't have any trouble with research, did you?
Not at all. Actually, I probably had 3 or 4 more chapters that I could have written that I had on my outline. And there's just so much material when you're dealing with the subject like the Catholic Church, because you have over 2,000 years of history to handle. And, we actually had to call it and, stop writing chapters because some of the things that we uncovered in this book are so explosive and they're so keyed on the time that we're in right now that we had to get this book out in print before the events actually occur.
My. On the program today, we're going to be discussing from your book, you and Dr. Horn, prophecies of the popes and the year 2012. Which one of you gentlemen want to start on this? What a tremendous subject.
Yeah, I'm happy to just jump right in here and get us going, Noah. The interesting thing about this is that I didn't imagine a year ago that I would be writing a book on this subject. As you know, I wrote the book Apollyon Rising 2012. You and I did a bunch of shows on that. You carry it and offer it here through the Southwest Radio Ministries. There was only one paragraph in that book that dealt with this subject. The prophecy of the popes. It's a famous prophecy. People can go to Wikipedia and they can look it up over there and read all about it. But I had only made just one paragraph reference to it in Apollyon Rising. Then what happened was I was speaking at a conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I had my staff with me. And we got to talking about how amazing it was that you have a 900-year-old medieval
Tricky, I think he's the final pope.
Prophecy. And whether you believe in the prophecy or not, whether you think it was inspired or not, regardless of what you think about it, the very next pope on that list is the pope following Benedict XVI. And according to the prophecy, this is the final pope. And not only is he the final pope, he will become the false prophet of biblical fame and will help give rise to the Antichrist. So imagine just the historical fact, the historical quality of having a 900-year-old medieval prophecy that's coming to pass literally before our eyes, because everywhere you look right now, if you watch Pope Benedict, he's still the Pope, but he's being wheeled around on a cart. He's feeble. He's a theologian.
Okay, I got one where the popes actually died. Here it is. Not died, he retired and Pope Bergoglio took over. So let's give this one a go.
that the juxtaposition, or I would say the Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, listeners from coast to coast and worldwide, to a very special Thursday edition of the Hagmann Report. It is Thursday, February 14th, 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me is my co-host, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann Report. Folks, tonight we've got a very special program. We're going to get right into it. We've got three very special guests, Mr. Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com, Mr. Tom Horn, and Mr. Chris Putnam, co-authors of Petrus Romanus, and an upcoming book as well. Gentlemen, let's get right to it. Steve, welcome. And
well, good evening, everyone. And hi, Tom. Hi, Chris. We're going to talk tonight about one of the most amazing set of circumstances playing out before the world's eyes, and whether people believe in prophecy or not, they're confronted with it right now. Obviously, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam in their book, Petrus Romanus, have pretty much put it out on the line and put it out on the line ahead of time. So we're going to talk about everything that is pertinent right now. We're going through a quantum shift pretty much in the way the world sees itself in the end times. And 1.2 billion Catholics, half of them are probably believing this is real. Half of them are listening to theologians saying it isn't. But Tom and Chris, welcome. And Tom, would you like to open up, and then we'll get right to the interview, wherever you guys want to go.
Oh, well, sure. And hi, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day. Hopefully you remember to get some flowers for your honey today. Anyway, yeah, who would have thought that it would only be 3 weeks following our show last month that the very premise that we were speaking of, the imminency of the Pope's resignation, would now be a fact. And it's my hope, too, Steve, that people, especially people inside the church, will snap out of their slumber now and awaken to the certainty that we could very well be watching, unfolding across the world right now, the heralding of the presence of an ancient spirit that is pressing to enter our reality, an entity that's ready to challenge the Most High God for the souls of planet Earth. And everywhere we look, we see probable evidence based on numerous corroborative signs that the unfolding of ancient biblical prophecy is happening around the world. You have President Obama set to visit Israel, the West Bank, and Jordan in March, preaching peace, peace. You have the Vatican that just reached a historic agreement with Israel that Chris Putnam predicted in our book, Petrus Romanus, a year ago, that he can explain later if we get time. Pope Benedict, of course, just stepped down 3 days ago. It sounds like feels like it was longer than that ago now, citing health reasons. That's also what we talked about on the last show and how we envisioned it in our book, Petrus Romanus. And now at the exact same time that Obama is going to be in the Middle East on his peace tour, the College of Cardinals are gathering, and in a few weeks from now, the conclave is going to elect the last pope, Petrus Romanus, the final pope in a 900-year-old medieval Catholic prophecy that was hidden away in the Catholic archives for hundreds of years, and which many, including Catholics, believe points to the coming of the false prophet and the Antichrist. So if we're not living at a time in which the eyes of people will open and they can snap out of their slumber, then I'm not sure there's any hope for those that can't be awakened. But thank God, it looks like an awful lot of people have suddenly awoke to this reality.
Well, I think, too, that we're seeing, Tom and Chris, we're seeing people being thrust into a world situation that, far from getting better and better, is getting worse and worse. And we're seeing now not only the fulfillment of St. Malachi's prophecy, by the way, that, ladies and gentlemen, was in 1139. And the point is that that's pretty accurate for a guy being that consistent. Now, I noticed, Tom and Chris can probably address this, the mainstream theologians, or most of the ones that at least get the press, are saying poo-poo. But you know what I learned about theologians, Tom? Their whole basis isn't the study of God. Their whole basis, and I've known quite a few and taken enough theology classes from quite a few to know that their whole purpose in life seems to be debunk the Word of God, challenge God, deny everything. But when we get to that point in the show tonight, you're going to talk about, and what, in my opinion, some of the most amazing stuff that I've ever heard coming from the Vatican of, astronomers and theologians. Now, Chris, you pretty much nailed this. And so as we're into 3 days after the announcement of the Pope, what are your thoughts contemporary with this moment? Because obviously people can get your book and read about everything that, led up to it. But tonight I want to really cover, by the grace of God, where we're at and the ramifications of you guys and all of your investigations.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's really great to be on the show, and hello to everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. I went out to eat with my wife tonight, and it's quite exciting to be here at this point in history. When Tom and I wrote Petrus Romanus and it came out last April, we spoke specifically about Pope Benedict resigning for health reasons. There were some rumors in Italy at the time, and we talked about those. But really what we were looking at was a Belgian Jesuit priest named Father René Thibault, who was one of the few scholars that I found that really did believe in this prophecy. Now, what you're saying, Steve, is absolutely correct in that the majority of the Jesuit scholars that you find out there are skeptical. Don't say that this prophecy is a forgery, that it was manufactured as a piece of propaganda. The thing is, they're both right, is what my investigation led me to. People can read about it in the book, but what happened is that probably the early portion of this prophecy, the first couple hundred years maybe, up until the 15th century, it looks like someone did kind of monkey around with it and make it a little better than it was. They matched it to a particular book, and we can sort of detect that they did that. But what that doesn't explain is the fact that this prophecy was in print. It was widely circulated. Nobody disputes that it was published in 1595, okay, in Arnold de Wion's book called The Tree of Life, or Ligum Vitae in Latin. So nobody disputes that. And what the skeptics don't really have any answers for is the fact that post-1595, the accuracy of the prophecy, it sort of changes. It's not so much only about the coat of arms, like a lot of the early ones are. It gets to be a little more strange. It talks about events within the papacy and different things like that. And, some of those are much more compelling than matches the coat of arms. So, the skeptics have points, but their points are all really, confined to the first couple hundred years between 1139 and the 1500s. So, I can concede their arguments, but they don't have any explanation for the fact, that in 1914, Benedict XV, the motto was religion depopulated, and that was the time of World War I. And religion was depopulated greater than any other time in history in Europe. And, they just don't have any answers for how that happened if this thing was a forgery. Now, I was talking about the Jesuit priest, René Thibault, and he did all kinds of just mystical, strange, Bible code-looking calculations, and he thought the papacy would change hands to the final pope in April of 2012. And I mapped all that out, put it on a spreadsheet. It's all in the book. And, 2012 came and went, and Tom and I are going, well, I guess René Thibault was wrong, but there's enough in the book that, to sustain it. It's still a viable entity, even though the 2012 thing didn't exactly work out. Well, then it turns out after Monday, I'm reading the New York Times, and they're talking about Benedict stepping down, and it says that his decision was made in March of 2012 last year after his trip to Mexico. So quite literally, the end of March 2012 is just days before April 2012 when René Thibault said that this would happen based on his calculations for the Malachi prophecy, which I explain in great detail in our book, Petrus Romanus. So he was right. That's all I got to say. He was really right. And it kind of redeemed that whole
squared up when the joint fix it.
And one thing I would add to that is there are Catholic academics who do believe in the prophecy of the popes. And one of the very early questions that we asked was, are these popes, are they matching the prophecy, especially after it was published in Lignum Vitae in the 1500s, and now it's in the public, right? You can't change it no more. You can't tinker with it no more. Why would the prophecies from that time forward actually seem to become even more and more accurate? Is it because it was a truly divinely or demonically inspired document that foresaw the future? Or, and this might be the deeper question, is it because there are believers inside the Vatican among the College of Cardinals, and they pick persons, have their names or coat of arms, whatever, in such a way that it will align with the prophecy of the popes? And for me, that's a deeper question, because that's almost like a kind of occultism, right? Like they're following a map towards a specific end, and for hundreds of years looking towards this period in time in which a final pope would be elected. And when you start looking at it that way, that they've been basically using it as a roadmap, it starts almost echoing some of the writings of Malachi Martin, who said that, you know, there was some occult goings-ons inside the Leonine walls of the Vatican, where they were intentionally invoking a period of time and a particular person who would fulfill these end times prophecies as the false prophet. Now, one thing I'd like to say very quickly is that setting dates for eschatological affairs has been shown historically to not be a very good idea. And Chris and I were very careful in Petrus Romanus to use a whole lot of different calculations when we speculated that the Pope would step down in March or April of last year. So it turns out that we were right, and it turns out that Rene Thibault was right. But why were we right? And it was because beneath the surface, I had a sense that there are occultic forces within the Roman Curia that are following this like a guideline, and they're choosing popes and even times. Why? But, you know, ask yourself this question: why would Pope Benedict have agreed to step down last year when the prophecy said that he would, but not make it public until this year? Well, that's something that we're investigating right now to try to get to the bottom of that. And I think there's occultic reasons that we will speak about maybe the next time we do a show. But I was going to say that you know, the Bible gives us these warnings that we don't know the day or the hour that the Lord is coming, and no man knows the arrival of the time of Christ, not even the angels of heaven. But on the other hand, while we don't know the particular moment of his appearance, and that's a mystery, elsewhere Jesus said we could know the signs of the times. And when you look around the world today, it's very difficult to not fully grasp that every part and parcel of biblical prophecy is unfolding at breakneck speed everywhere in the world right now.
Wow. Well, Tom, I'm sorry. Let me just ask a quick question, and either Chris. One of the things I think that we should set the stage for is that we're going to see the greatest transformation in theological thought, and I would like to, if we could, just have both you guys address the alien connection, because it puts everything into perspective. Because, you know, there's been this whole thing, Tom, you and I have talked about it over the years, when disclosure comes, etc. But I don't think most people grasp yet, and this is what I think I kind of want to give them, if you will, the impetus to really follow this thing through as you guys develop through the rest of the show tonight. I would like, first of all, Tom, you to address the alien, the connection between the astronomers and different people that you and Chris both talked to, and then Chris, you address it too, because I think it's critical. In other words, I want to get, if you wouldn't mind, I want to reverse the order of this a little bit in order to show people that whether they think it's silly or not, some of the brightest minds, and some of these guys are truly bright, are absolutely preparing in their own minds and have portrayed it to you and spoken it out to you that the gods are coming back, the alien savior. Will you address it first, Tom, and then we'll turn it over to Chris?
Sure, and it is going backwards, but I don't mind, Steve. Whenever you and I do radio, we kind of sling out in every direction.
Yeah, the bottom line, my brother, at the beginning.
Yeah, that's always the bottom line at the beginning. Well, in this new book, Exo Vaticana, by the way, it headed to the typesetter today, and we're putting pressure on everybody to try to hurry and get this book done. We'd like to have it in print by the time the conclave decides who Petrus Romanus is going to be. And we don't know whether the last pope is going to turn out to be a person that's on our short list, but whoever that is, intrigue surrounds how he may accommodate the newly celebrated astrotheology of Rome's top astronomers and theologians that we document in the book, and whether this is somehow going to fulfill the Catholic prophecies of the coming man of sin, the seed of Satan, either as an alien serpent savior or as a deceiver that points mankind to a God of another world. Now, first of all, in point of fact, the Bible describes both the false prophet and Petrus Romanus, or the false prophet, Petrus Romanus, or the Antichrist, as having allegiances, endowments that are not of this earth. Not only can both of them call fire down from out of the heavens. By the way, I want to say something when I get a chance here tonight about the lightning that struck St. Peter's Basilica, the fire that came down from heaven to mark the departure of one pope and the arrival of another one. I think there's some important stuff to say about that. But the Bible tells us that they can call fire down out of heaven, which is suspected to be the host location of the aliens. You can read Revelation 13, 12, 14, all of this about this clear alliance that the power that the Antichrist and the false prophet have with the powers of the celestial realm. But the prophet Daniel tells us very specifically that the belief system of the false prophet, and if that's Petrus Romanus, then we're talking about the next pope, that their belief system, his and the Antichrist, will honor a strange alien God. Now, this is very true to the Hebrew language. Daniel 11:38 says this, "But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God." That's what it says, a strange God, "whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and shall cause them," now the God suddenly is of them, "to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain," end quote. Now, several parts of that prophecy stand out as very unusual. First of all, the God of forces, or alternatively, God of fortresses, has been connected to Baal Shaman, which is literally the Lord of the heavens. This was a deity that the Gnostics worshipped as the greatest angel in the heavens. But the second reference is to a deity that is a strange God. That's intriguing because the Hebrew text, and Chris, as a biblical scholar and a Greek scholar, breaks down the Hebrew in the book that we're working on right now to show how this could literally be rendered an alien God. And then you add to this other documents that we provide, which we don't have time to talk about all these point-by-point blows tonight, but turn-of-the-century Protestant scholars translated that text as directly related to the Vatican and to Roman Catholicism, and we show what they have to say about all that. But the point is, when you keep that in mind, and you consider the documents from Catholic sources that we're going to provide that make it evident that for hundreds of years, Catholic prophets and Protestant reformers believed that the Antichrist and his champion, the false prophet, Petrus Romanus, would ultimately champion a strange alien deity, and that they would do this through an apostate priesthood seated in Rome. Things start getting very interesting because it's not just now Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. This is biblical prophecy. The prophet Daniel actually described what would happen, and that the Antichrist would be the promoter of a strange alien God. And furthermore, the Catholic prophets and the Protestant reformers talk about how this would ultimately lead to war and destruction from the heavens. That's part of the prophecy of the popes, right? That Rome will be destroyed. And those visionaries, in their assessment concerning a powerful alien Christ and his coming war as the result of otherworldly alliances, are echoed among military scholars down through time too. 1955, General Douglas MacArthur, "We now face a new world, a world of change. We speak in strange terms of harnessing the cosmic energy of ultimate conflict between a united human race and the sinister forces of some other planetary galaxy." This is what he said. "The nations of the world will have to unite because the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets." What in the world did Douglas MacArthur know? And then 30 years later, you have America's most beloved president, Ronald Reagan, standing before the United Nations saying that he often wonders, how much what divides us would melt away. How our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside the world. Well, even more recently, the former...
I disagree with that. If aliens come, the world would not unite to fight them. They just wouldn't. I disagree with that.
UFO advisor for the United Kingdom of Defense, Nick Pope, who is a confidant to us, to me, and we also, by the way, interview him, and he's in the book talking about some stuff that he hasn't talked about publicly before, but you might have saw where he was in the news not long ago saying that Britain has prepared and is preparing top secret, sophisticated apparatus in preparation of a future military engagement against space invaders. This is even in the news. So you can, anyway, bottom line is that it was prophesied in the book of Daniel. So when we tonight talk about how Petrus Romanus and the coming of the Antichrist is going to give rise to a new kind of Christianity, one based on the worship of morally superior aliens who are actually coming here to evangelize us. And you'll get this from the mouth of even the Vatican's top astronomers like Guy Cosmonago.
Diane, 38,000 animals. Would there even be 38,000 animals in the vicinity? Like, how prolific are your animals there?
We're not making this stuff up, and they're not as far out there as people might first assume. It's based on an enormous amount of military intelligence and theological conveyances that are saying to those who are in the know, the people on the inside who walk the darkest corridors of our military laboratories, that they've only got a certain amount of time. A time clock is ticking down, and it's nearing midnight, and they have to prepare for something that is coming. Well, Chris, makes you wonder, doesn't it, if something of that knowledge wasn't behind the recent Vatican comments when it criticized Ridley Scott's film Prometheus, when it said they criticized the film and said, quote, "It is a bad idea to defy the gods." Well, who in the world's feelings were they trying to protect?
Well, obviously they don't care about the God of heaven, but they worship the God of forces. Chris, in Daniel 11:38, it's so hard for especially Protestants to even handle this. Yet it seems like, based on your studies, is it fair to say that the Catholic scholars have been more out in front when it comes to the connection of aliens and UFOs, or is that an assumption that has no basis in fact?
Well, I'll tell you, Steve, they're out in front of us in a lot of ways, but not in the way that that would actually be beneficial to anyone. I kind of do take to task a lot of the statements of these Jesuits, but the worldview that they're coming from is really a naturalistic, scientific kind of point of view. They're not looking at this scripturally. They threw the Bible under the bus many years ago, and I dedicate quite a bit of apologetics type argumentation in this book to picking some of their statements apart. They have the same worldview that you hear coming from Richard Dawkins and people like that. They literally do. They assume evolution. And so these Jesuit astronomers, where they're coming from in astronomy, there's a thing called the principle of mediocrity. Now, what that is an extrapolation from the Copernican principle. And that derives from Copernicus proved that the sun is in the middle of the solar system, so the Earth is just one of many planets. So the Copernican principle says that, well, the Earth is not, there's nothing special about the Earth. It's not in a special place in the universe. And then from there, they extrapolate what they call the principle of mediocrity. And this is, it extends this line of thinking where, well, the Earth's not special, it's just a mediocre planet. It's probably just one example of millions of planets. And human beings aren't very special, and life isn't very special, and we're just evolved primates. And, there's just no reason to assume that the universe is not teeming with life. And, to draw those conclusions, conclusions, you really have to abandon the biblical worldview because, you know, the Bible might be silent on the existence of other worlds and extraterrestrials, but it's not silent about the fact that mankind is special and that there's a cosmic drama playing out, you know, that has universal importance because God's sovereignty and his honor and his integrity is on the line. And, you know, he has made prophetic promises, and the character of God is at stake, you know, in carrying those out. So to say that we're mediocre and the earth isn't important and mankind is not important is really just abandoning any kind of biblical theology whatsoever. That's the worldview that's coming through things like astrobiology. And, you know, a lot of the modern astronomers think that way. So from here, they kind of.
Exactly, Triggy. If we know they are fallen angels and we're not educated, he couldn't possibly not have heard that and give it consideration and took it on board. There's no way he could not know that.
Extend to the fact that it's just inevitable that there's aliens out there. Now, you know, to be clear, you know, the way that we're arguing our case in this book is, you know, we almost consider the question of real aliens to be a whole separate matter because what we see in the evidence, you know, when you study the contacts and the UFOs accounts, and there's some really strong evidence that something's going on, but these do not appear to be space aliens. They really appear to be deceptive entities that are operating under the guise of aliens, and they're deceiving people. And, you know, there's this whole mythology, this mythos that the aliens are coming to help humanity evolve and become more spiritual, and they're going to save us from nuking ourselves with atomic bombs. And all these ideas have been seeded over a period of many years into the public consciousness. So people that don't necessarily really, they're not into UFOs, but they still believe this. It's kind of an underlying factor in their worldview. And I argue in the book that this has been done intentionally. And I think it's been done by design because they're preparing the world to accept this when it shows up. And I think it's been a process. And you can really see where it really kicked in high gear in the late 1940s. And of course, it's really in high gear now. And if you look at the surveys, like half of all Americans believe that aliens have already visited Earth. I mean, right now. And, you know, and people will snicker about it and laugh about it and act like it's goofy and it's kind of wacky, but they believe it. Over half of the people already believe it. So, you know, the strategy has been effective. Now, you know, I think that in Scripture, we see that we don't do battle with flesh and blood, but with powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. And these powers and principalities are influencing our earth. Their job is really to steer things in the world to their twisted ends. And they really want to divert people from the biblical worldview. And you know, what is more effective than something that tells you that the earth is just a mediocre planet, that we're not very significant, we're just evolved monkeys, and, you know, there's no God, it's just aliens out there. And, you know, this is the idea that is really being pushed on the public very strong. And I think we're going to probably hear something soon that says that life on Earth started from space, that they're going to be promoting the idea that panspermia is true, the idea that aliens seeded life on Earth. That's what the movie Prometheus is about. And I think that you'll probably see some evidence for that. So there'll be a scientist claiming that he has some kind of proof. And then from there, you know, we'll probably have some entity claim, you know, credit for that. And that wouldn't surprise me. And, you know, I think that's the kind of thing that I'm expecting because, you know, people believe in this and people really have their worldview steered toward science is the ultimate arbiter of truth. And they don't believe Scripture. They don't believe God anymore, but they believe in scientists, and scientists believe in aliens. So what could lead the world to worship a figure? You know, it's going to have to be clothed in the credibility of science. And I think that this concept of aliens and extraterrestrials is a really compelling thing that the world would accept.
Well, I think that Hollywood has done its best, and I've made the claim, and Tom and I talked about this real quickly. A 30-second short version, Chris, is that obviously Hollywood's tied to the intelligence community it's been stated by people I know in that world that every script that has any relevance to future technology, alien technology, is subject to the scrutiny of specific groups of intelligence officials who are tasked with either leaking or directing or misdirecting the plots of something. A good example is the movie Invaders from Mars, the old black and white version where a little kid looks out, a flying saucer lands, goes into the earth, he goes into the tunnel, and that's the first time the implant idea was ever put forth into the scientific genre. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing, I believe, full mind control, preparing people for the alien savior. And I think that what people have got to understand is that the attempt to get the aliens to be good aliens instead of to serve mankind like the Twilight Zone and coming to eat us. But I think the problem that's interesting is that in the scripture in Obadiah, God speaking, though they set their nest amongst the stars, yet will he bring them down. You know, and then we go to Revelation 12:7, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought in his angels, which brings me now to Tom Horn. Tom, you said that if I can remember correctly, just a couple of days ago or whatever, but they're actually expecting almost a reptilian, are they not?
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. And let me say that Chris is being very careful. What he's saying, Chris is a very careful person. He's a theologian, and he studies his words before he says them. And he's not like me. He'll stay away from the more fantastic aspects of what we're going to be doing and saying in this book. And that's good because he brings me back and balances me out, and in the end makes me sound more sophisticated than what I actually am. He's the investigator and the theologian, but I'm intending that we're going to also say some things that'll take some people by surprise, and I actually want to provide some of the quotes, shocking stuff actually. That people have given to us. But first, before we get too far past it, I want to say something that I mentioned just a moment ago, how on the February 11th, so just 3 days ago now, right? Lightning struck St. Peter's Basilica twice immediately following the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. Now, some people might not make anything of that, but lightning is something in sacred literature that almost always carries spiritual connotation. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's evil, like when Jesus referred to Satan as falling like lightning. And I can't help but think that the timing of two lightning bolts on this particular building, the St. Peter's Basilica, at the Vatican, at the exact time following Benedict's resignation, I felt that it was mathematically improbable of chance. First, because two bolts. I don't, again, what do you make of coincidence and numerology? But we know that in sacred text and in scripture, these kind of things would be interpreted as signs and omens. And when the false prophet and the Antichrist appear, it tells us in the Bible to be looking for the fact that there will be signs and wonders in the heavens. There will be omens, and they will have the power to call fire or lightning down from heaven. The false prophet and the Antichrist have the ability to do that. Now, I said that to say this. There are also Catholics who are very in tune with what I'm saying here. In fact, one of the most highly visited Catholic websites is run by a man by the name of Michael Brown. He's a man, I've known him for a long time as far as communicating via email and things like that, off and on for years, over a decade. He's read my books. He reads Raiders News Update. I read Spirit Daily. But he has a top story on Spirit Daily website today. You could go there right now and read it, about the lightning that struck St. Peter's Basilica 3 days ago. And it's important because it reflects what the Catholics think about the prophecy of the popes and these signs that are being given to us now. And his article is ominously titled, quote, "When lightning strikes, sometimes it is simple energy in the air and sometimes perhaps something more." That's the title. But Michael goes on to point his Catholic brothers and sisters to recognizing how that many of their apparitions omens and warnings to the faithful have been accompanied by lightning. He talks about the apparitions of Lourdes, which, by the way, was also commemorated Monday, the same day the Pope made his announcement. This is another part of the investigation that I'm currently working on right now to put together the signatures around this. But he reminds people how those apparitions were combined with thunder and lightning. Then he shows them how thunder and a flash of lightning introduced the first appearances of the apparition at Fatima in 1917. The same thing occurred at Medjugorje when the night before Mary's first reported apparition, lightning struck with such force that actually damaged the village post office and other buildings, and villagers, Catholic villagers, went rushing out into the streets, sprinkling holy water all over everything. Unforgettable thunder and lightning appeared on the mountains of La Salette in France, heralding the appearance of Mary in 1846. And those prophecies of La Salette also pointed to a time when Rome would become apostate. So those are very important prophecies. He talks about how during the filming of The Passion of Christ by Catholic Mel Gibson, lightning struck the set 3 times. It hit the production assistant twice. It struck, whatever his name is, the actor that played Jesus, when he was preparing to do a Sermon on the Mount. Anyway, on and on. Cardinal Angelo Sodano, just a couple of days ago, described Benedict's resignation as coming like, quote, a lightning bolt from the heavens. So these Catholic mystics put a lot of stock in this, whether we do or not. They do, and this again goes back to my point, that whether or not the prophecy of the popes was a truly inspired prophecy may be a moot point. It's what does it mean to the true believers, the true mystics in the world's largest Christian-oriented church. Now, I want to just read something real quick. This is a paragraph that I found very telling in the Spirit Daily article. Michael writes this, quote, "Still, when there is lightning, there is something about it that seems unsettling and sometimes as a warning. Many things are astir. A pope is resigning for the first time in 6 centuries. A pope who took the name Benedict, as in the saint who battled evil. In a letter on the same day, February 11, 2013, naming a special envoy to a solemn celebration of the World Day of the Sick, Benedict included the term Mary, mediatrix of all graces," end quote. Now listen to what he says about this. Quote, "This is a title that is used very sparingly by pontiffs and is often attached in the minds of many Catholic faithful with the potential declaration of a new dogma, one that they feel will herald major events in the world, a dogma that up until now Benedict has resisted. It comes when astronomers expect to see a highly visible comet, which may even appear during the conclave announcing a new pope. Some believe the next pope will be the last in this particular era, and time will tell," end quote. So here you have one of the most well-read Catholic websites online talking about how this could be the last pope, Petrus Romanus, and that the comet is a sign, and furthermore, that a papal decree heralding a major change in dogma seems to be implied by the very language that Pope Benedict used during his resignation. Now, when you read that, Chris, it's just like Michael somehow stole into one of our houses and grabbed a copy of Exo Vaticana, and like he's reading the documents that we haven't even yet provided, because it indeed does portend a new papal decree, a new dogma, heralding major events in the world, possibly connected to the so-called comet, that announces the arrival of a new pope. And don't forget, my evangelical listener friends, comets in the days of old, including in the Bible, were objects or omens that signified the arrival of persons or epochs of spiritual significance. It was a moving comet or a star that the Magi followed to find Jesus Christ in the New Testament. That was a sign heralding his birth. And now we have the arrival of what's being called the comet of the century, potentially the closest one ever to arrive near the earth without striking it. And it's set to appear in a few days from now, right when the papal electors are gathering in Rome to elect Petrus Romanus, the final pope. In other words, just as a comet or a star appeared heralding the arrival of Jesus, this new comet is being interpreted by some Catholic mystics as an antithesis, a copycat, pointing to the arrival of the Antichrist and his false prophet. I think that there was something very astonishing about this, and so do some Catholics. But, you know, obviously, if a person chooses to believe that it was just an absolutely extraordinary consequence, that the minute Benedict said he was going to step down, lightning bolt strike St. Peter's Basilica twice in a row, while a comet is going to appear at the very moment that the conclave is electing the final pope from a 900-year-old prophecy, there's the Catholic mystic out there that would buy that for 1 minute. Now, they may not be talking about it, but they believe this in their soul, just like Michael was writing about on the Spirit Daily website today. Now, one other thing, I'm sorry, I get on a roll, I start talking, and I can't shut up. Chris should tell you sometime tonight what he wrote in the prologue for Exo Vaticana that explains why the cover of our book looks the way that it does, with those UFOs appearing over the top of the Vatican. That wasn't just artistic license. That actually depicts something that that is historical about UFOs, comets, signs in the sky, and their strange connections to popes and even to the prophecy of the Pope that we investigate in both the first book, Petrus Romanus, which now, as we know, accurately predicted when Benedict would step down, the first pope to do so in 600 years, and the next book takes it to the next step.
Well, I think, too, it was interesting because immediately when I saw the picture of the lightning hitting the top of the basilica, I quoted Luke 10:17 through 19, verses 18. He said unto them, Jesus speaking to the disciples, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. But you know, the next part of that, Chris, is interesting because with that designation of Satan falling from heaven like lightning, there's a promise there. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. It's interesting, Tom. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but it dawned on me that the juxtaposition, or I would say the contrast between those two verses, it's Satan falling like lightning from heaven, and then the promise of the Lord Jesus Christ to give unto his disciples, the people who believe in him, the power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Did you ever see that, Chris, in that context?
You know, that's a great promise. And, I think that Jesus did give us that power. That was the power to go about with the gospel and take back what the powers and principalities had laid claim on. And that's been going on ever since the first century. But I mean, I think that we're getting ready now to see a resurgence of supernaturalism. I think that was important, that sign. And, I don't doubt that the powers have their claws in deeply at the Vatican at this point. And, believers in Christ are protected, and he has given us that authority. And that's an awesome promise. Anyone that's in Christ can have security in that, and that no matter what the dreadful judgments that are coming, he has promised to carry us through them. Now,
right, but I guess Chris, I'm saying this, and Tom too, I want to ask you because, I've read that a whole lot of times in my 40 years of walking redeemed by the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ, but I've never put those two together, okay? The time of Satan's falling from lightning, because listen, I also would have said, guess who just showed up in the Vatican, okay? If he had been waiting for his time. But behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Again, not to belabor a point, but that's in specific reference to the verse before it. So here's what I'm trying to say. With the prophetic significance, Tom, that you just laid out and that Chris has written in the introduction to your new book with the flying saucer over the Vatican and all of those issues that we're going to be dealing with, the point is, I think it's telling because I think it's more of, if you will, a time signature or a time lock on the whole revelation, which God gave to you guys on, obviously, that Benedict was going to resign, but also the next step of the way is what they're getting to. And Tom, I really want you to just, if you wouldn't mind, because we've got 2 more hours after this, but I want you to detail what some of the astronomers and the theologians have told you of who they are expecting to be the alien savior.
Yeah, okay. Well, and this is something that Chris can speak to too. The bottom line is, in the beginning, Chris and I were both scratching our head. I mean, why the Vatican has taken a very carefully designed, a deliberate course over the last few years. And now I'm talking about among their astronomers and theologians. This is a great mystery, but it implies knowledge on their part of facts that are hidden to most of the world, that we believe hold far-reaching and historic implications. It actually illustrates how Rome is either wittingly or unwittingly setting itself up to become the agent of mass end times deception regarding salvation from above. And from a very practical or a psychological point of view, that's because throughout history, there's one thing we've learned about people. There exists a very clear pattern wherein man's psychological need of a savior is displayed during times of distress, right? A time like today, when people start looking skyward for divine intervention. A lot of, academics have written about this. There's a professor of systematic theology at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary by the name of Ted Peters, and he wrote that with the constant threat of thermonuclear destruction in the post-World War II era leaving our planet in a state of insecurity and anxiety, no wonder many have begun to hope for a Messiah to save us. And then he goes on to talk about how the holiness of the sky and the need for a salvation converge and blend whenever the powerful UFO zooms up and we say, could this be the arrival of our celestial savior? Well, we asked Brother Guy Contalmagno, who gave us 5 different interactions from his office there in Rome. He is the lead astronomer in Rome for the Vatican, who oversees the collection of meteorites, but he also is an astronomer, and in fact, for that matter, he comes to Mount Graham, where we were, and also uses the facilities there and also at the University of Arizona. But when we asked him about that, he assured us that if highly advanced ET saviors from outer space touch down on planet Earth soon, as some of them believe they're going to, it's not going to mean what Catholics believe in is wrong, but rather that Catholics are going to find out that everything is truer in ways they couldn't even yet have imagined. Now, that's almost kind of like the starting point. That sounds astonishing, but man, it's nothing compared to where we go from there into this gigantic setup where you've got what? All the people of the world. Steve, you just wrote a book. I just saw the confidential cover that I can't share or tell anybody about for this fantastic book that you've just written. And in part of it, you've got I can't even say what you've got a picture of, but you're talking about some of the Indian history and the giants. And in that study, I'm sure that you're fully aware with the Hopi and their thought that, during a time of great distress on the earth, a blue star is going to appear in the heavens and it's going to herald a time of the arrival of a messianic figure. Well, where the Hopi see this blue star, the Vatican astronomers see space brothers en route now to guide us into the light. And one would hope that evangelical Christians would understand that the Antichrist is going to initially assume the role of a fabricated end times Messiah who mimics the return of Christ, and that his false second coming is discussed in the New Testament as being attended by, quote, heavenly signs and lying wonders, 2 Thessalonians, right? And so the question is whether those wonders that are going to be presented soon, what are those wonders? Chris mentioned a moment ago that maybe there's soon going to be the disclosure of what? Artificial structures on another world, maybe even something more dramatic, a flying saucer armada piloted by creatures who appear to be advanced humanoids, but who are in fact our evil supernaturalism. Well, I'm hogging the show again. Let me just do something very quickly. Let me point listeners to a book that we're going to be providing free of charge on a data DVD that comes with Exo Vaticana. This book was written in 1958. It's a peculiar book in that it was published under the title A Case of Conscience by James Blish. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but this book's key because it is one of two. It is one that Father Guy Cosmonaldo pointed to as faction that could provide the kind of value lessons that he and other Jesuits are using to determine their back and responses to the official disclosure of alien life and salvation. And in this story, there is a Jesuit like Cosmonaldo. He's a priest named Father Ruiz Sanchez, and they set up this scenario, a fictional scenario, where a team of scientists in the near future travel to a planet that's dubbed Lithia, and I want to say something about that too if I get a chance. But they go to Lithia to study the Lithians who are there. But unknown to the science team, the Vatican secretly advises the Catholic Father to investigate whether the aliens have redeemable souls. And what he finds in the Lithians are intelligent creatures whose morality fits perfect with Christianity, but they're devoid of any concept of religion or God. And this presents a dilemma that includes, now listen, it includes the Jesuits back here on Earth, who are described as the cerebral cortex of the church, dealing with a knotty moral, theological, and organizational issues surrounding a papal proclamation concerning the seed of Satan that will change the historical dogma of the church. Now, here's what's interesting. The fictional Father Ruiz Sanchez warns the Vatican that they need to classify Lithia as X1, which in this scenario is a planet that's forever to be quarantined from Earth and humans. Why? Because of its potential for great deception. Listen to what Father Ruiz Sanchez says here. Quote, what we have here on Lithia is very clear indeed. We have, and now I'm prepared to be blunt, a planet and a people propped up by the ultimate enemy. It is a gigantic trap prepared for all of us, for every man on earth and of it. We can do nothing with it but reject it, nothing but say to it, retro mi santanas. If we compromise with it in any way, we are damned, end quote. Well, when Ruiz Sanchez uses this phrase, retro mi santanas, he's enunciating a medieval Catholic prophecy for exorcism, Vade retro santanas, or go back Satan, which is a clear reckoning that the aliens on Lithia are part of a satanic plot and that they are to be avoided at all costs. He sees it as purely an astrotheological conspiracy that's designed to mislead mankind. And he eventually convinces the Pope in this storyline, Pope Hadrian in the storyline, of the satanic stratagem. But here's where the irony starts coming in. The irony is that not all of the church's theologians, and this raises the important question whether the author of A Case of Conscience or whether Guy Cosmonaldo foresaw how great deception would eventually be embraced by the Vatican as a result of some of Rome's celebrated scholars and astronomers. And by the way, I'm not just the only one that talked to Cosmonaldo. A science fiction writer by the name of Joe Walton, and you can Google Joe Walton's conversation with Cosmonaldo, asked him what he made of the issues posed by James Blish in his novel, and Cosmonaldo said to them the same thing he said to us. Number one, the Jesuits are the strongest advocates of enculturation, which means allowing alien cultures to maintain their paganism while modifying expressions of Christian ideas inside those beliefs. Secondly, they would accept the alien cultures for who they are. They wouldn't try to evangelize them. They wouldn't try to change their beliefs per se. And two, they'd be willing not only to not change them, but to adapt. This is Cosmonaldo's word, to adapt the alien religious practices into a form and a language that then could be accepted here on Earth. And so if Brother Guy had been on Lithia, Walton concluded we'd be in contact with the aliens right now and finding out as much as we could about their versions of salvation. Now, there's a lot more to this, and there's other parts of this that actually get very spooky, but I'm just going on and on here, so I don't want to hog the show. But this is one of the very documents that was referred to by Guy Cosmonaldo while we were trying to get to the bottom of where in the world are they coming from with the theology that you will learn about in Exo Vaticana.
Well, Chris, what about your introduction to Exo Vaticana? Obviously, Tom referred to it earlier. You know, what, and I have not read it, so the point is that obviously it's not out yet, but I'm just saying, what was the main thing you were trying to get across as you wrote the introduction to Exo Vaticana?
Well, that's an interesting question. So on the cover of our book, there's a flying saucer, and it's above St. Peter's, and there's like a beam of light coming down. You know, it looks all very science fiction and fantastic. And, you know, we had that picture done for the book, and it's like, great. And, you know, at the time, I was digging into UFO reports and correlating them to theological events. And for Roman Catholics, the year 1978 is infamous. It's the famous year of 3 popes. Now, this intersects with the Malachi prophecy, because this is when Paul VI died, and then John Paul I was elected pope, and he only lived for 33 days, and his Malachi motto was "from the midst of the moon," and of course, this corresponded perfectly to the half moon. And when he died, you know, John Paul II came into office. So, you know, a really unprecedented time in 1978. Well, what is even more impressive, and what hardly anyone knows, and this will be the first time really this is going out on the airwaves to so many people, and it is featured prominently in the beginning of the book because it's so interesting. But right during the time of that little brief papacy of 33 days for John Paul I, who some people think was murdered, there was a massive UFO flap over Rome. Okay. And I'm not talking about just somebody saw something, little vague light in the sky. I'm talking about the police saw it, Vatican guards saw it. It was so widely reported, it made the New York Times news service and was ran in newspapers all across the United States in 1978. Now, MUFON has accounts of it. I'll read a little snippet from the MUFON report from September in 1978. At 5:50 a.m. on September 14th, people in Rome saw a triangular object for 5 minutes. About the same time, people near Florence reported seeing cigar-shaped object. Early on the morning of the 16th, highway police near Rome received calls about a luminous triangle and a beam of greenish light. So you have these early morning triangular craft flying over Rome, report about police, Vatican guards, airline workers. I document and footnote where you can find all these reports. So, you know, there's a green radiation beam that was reported widely, but, you know, hundreds of people saw this. Now, and then 2 weeks later, Pope John Paul I mysteriously dies on September.
Yeah, tricky. They wouldn't really be zombies if they could think, would they?
28th, 1978. So it's just right in the middle of his brief papacy, this huge UFO flap happens. So just on October 16th, 1978, just a few weeks later, the College of Cardinals elects the labor of the sun, John Paul II, to the Pope. Now, of course, he was born on a solar eclipse, and so the labor of the sun really fit him really well. We have another precise match with the Malachi prophecy, but the UFOs really got even more invasive at this time. And I mean, they were seen all across. I have a clipping from the New York Times news service that we'll put in the book, and we'll blow it up big enough where everyone can read the original article from 1978. It just talks about all of these events that I'm talking about with the green light. There were some fishermen that went missing, and they think that these guys were abducted. As far as we can tell, no one ever found them. So you have dozens of professionals, policemen, guards reporting this massive UFO flap. It's in all the major papers in 1978. It's amazing how this sort of stuff happens, and then people just kind of forget about it. But there was just an unprecedented level of UFO activity over Rome, and this is documented. It's in the newspapers. We're not making it up. And here you go. You know, so that was 1978, and that was the beginning of John Paul II, who's probably like the rock star pope that everybody remembers. So he has a pretty long papacy, and he makes it till April 2nd, 2005. And, in 2005, and some of you probably remember this because Tom ran the articles on Raiders News, but when John Paul II died, there was another UFO sighting above the Vatican. And this time it was caught on camera, and it even was shown on American television. And it's hard. We tried to contact the television station that ran it to get the original video, and they don't keep archives back that far. But we did get a screen capture of the original broadcast on Wish TV, and we put that in the book as well. That was on April 9th, 2005 at 6 a.m. There's a photograph of what looks like a flying saucer over the Vatican right as John Paul died and was laying in the Vatican getting prepared for the final mass. So that, an Indianapolis news channel ran that story. So, this is a pattern of events, and we found more connections between UFOs and the Vatican, but, that is very suggestive, to say the least.
Hold that, Chris. I think we're going to take a break. Are we not, Doug?
Yes, sir, we are. Folks, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on a very special Thursday edition. Our guest, Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com, co-authors Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. And their website is, of course, RaidersNewsUpdate.com. We'll be back in about 3.5 minutes. Stay with us.
Hold on to your seats. The Hagman and Hagman flight is now taking off. Doug and Joe Hagman have cleared the runway of TSA agent Jihad.
Choices will be for Petrus Romanus, which would be appropriate given the fact that we are now looking at the election of the final pope on the prophecy of the popes. Here's what people can expect. The College of Cardinals, they're going to assemble. They're going to elect a new pope in conclave, which is the process of sequestering the voting members of the college in Vatican City so that they don't have contact with the outside world. There's a whole process, that whole set of rules. There can only be so many electors. Supposedly, there's not supposed to be more than 120. I don't know how flexible they are on the rules because the college right now is, I think, close to 200 cardinals, 195, something like that. Any cardinal that turns 80 before the day of the papacy is vacated is not supposed to be eligible to vote. There's a 2/3 +1 majority rule. There's ballots. So it's a whole process. And now it's going to happen in the middle of March. This is what they're saying. And by the way, that might reflect the rules. See, Benedict said that he's going to make his resignation, which he actually gave internally to certain members of the government at the Vatican last year, at either the end of March or the beginning of April. He gave that. That's why, by the way, they've been building his house for him. They've been remodeling a building that used to be just used by nuns, and they're turning it into a house for him. He's actually going to live on the grounds of the Vatican. Some people think that's going to give him maybe an undue influence over whoever the next pope is, but we'll talk more about that at some other point. But so they've been doing this since April of last year. So he turned in his resignation, but officially he didn't turn it in till just 3 days ago, and said that he's going to step down on February 28th. Well, now the rules are that you typically wait 2 weeks. So we are thinking that the college will meet officially starting in sometime around March 15th. Now, usually they take between 12 to 13 days to elect who the next pope will be. If it goes further than that, then they get away from the whole 2/3 +1 majority, and they just go to a common majority, 51%. But there's a whole process. I don't guess I need to explain the process, but that's what's happening now. And we expect that before Easter, before the end of March, we're going to have the new pope, and he will be the last one on a 900-year-old medieval prophecy.
I'd like to chime in on the Israel question. One of the things that we talked about last year, biblical prophecy plays out in Jerusalem. It's centered on Israel, and Tom and I both share a similar theological commitment to Israel being significant, in the end times, that God is going to turn his attention back to that nation in a way just to fulfill his promises. It's not because, they're any better than anyone else or anything like that. It's just because he said he would. And, so we expect that the city of Jerusalem is going to be ground zero for the end times in a lot of ways. Now, what's really interesting about that, so anybody that is a major player in end time prophecy is going to want to have a presence in the holy city of Jerusalem. And it's indisputable that the Vatican has always wanted to have sovereignty over the holy city of Jerusalem. That's what the Crusades were about. There are a lot of Catholic churches in Jerusalem, and but they've never really had the properties that they want. Now, something historic that we talked about in our book last year that was still in the process of negotiating, nobody knew which way it was going to go, was announced at the beginning of February that the Vatican got sovereignty over what they call the Hall of the Last Supper on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So that is another thing that we were talking about last year that has come to pass. So the Pope literally has a seat on Mount Zion now. And that's obviously very significant from a prophetic point of view.
Well, and Chris, isn't it also true that if something, we look at the prophecy of the popes, we also look at the prophecy in the Zohar, and both of these tell us that exactly at this time, in fact, the Zohar specifically mentions the year 5773, which started in September 5 months ago, and ends September of this year, 2013, specifically mentions that this is when the Mashiach, the Messiah, will begin making himself known. But because the Jews rejected Jesus, evangelicals understand that this is actually a prophecy talking about the coming of the Antichrist. And it specifically mentions that all of the nations of the world, or the representatives of the nations of the world, are going to be gathered in Rome. And this could only be talking about a conclave. I can't imagine any other reason why representatives from all of the nations of the world would be in the city of Rome. It sounds very much like a conclave, but it says that then Rome will be destroyed. We've said, or you've said actually in your research, you said this last year in the book Petrus Romanus, that if you had to put the puzzle pieces together, it sounds like the Vatican could be destroyed based on what many other Catholic prophecies have said, that Rome's going to be destroyed. And then where are they going to set up the new Vatican? And you look at this agreement that they just reached with Israel, and it makes you start thinking all kind of thoughts about.
Well, he said the Catholics are going to be behind a lot of the atrocities going on in tribulation. Apparently, the Catholics are going to be front and center of it.
The new temple.
I'll see if I can find it. I've got today's show already booked up with stuff, but I'll see if I can find it and I'll play it tomorrow. Let me see if I can find it.
About a presence of the Vatican in Israel. I mean, I'm kind of throwing this all out there, but isn't this something you've written about?
Absolutely. That prophecy in the Zohar is rather chilling. I have it right in front of me, and there's a section of it that reads, in the year 73, which is half 2012, half 2013 till September, the kings of the world will assemble in the great city of Rome, and the Holy One will shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones until they are destroyed, with the exception of those who have not yet arrived. Now, that's pretty chilling, and it does seem to intersect with what the Malachi prophecy says at the end. Now, I don't know if that's going to come to pass, but it does look like the kings of the world are going to be gathering in Rome here in March, which is in this year, 5773, just as, a medieval prophecy from, Kabbalah. That's what the Zohar is. It's Jewish mysticism and occultism, but, it's kind of chilling that there is going to be that gathering. And, in Petrus Romanus, I dedicated 2 chapters to dealing with, the relationship between the Catholic Church and Jewish people historically. It's not been a good record. And, and then where is that going now? And what do we expect to happen? You know, quite a few of us that look at prophecy do expect a third temple to be built in Jerusalem. And, you know, we don't think that this is necessarily a good thing. I mean, a lot of, you know, people that are into prophecy get excited when they hear about it because it, you know, it is exciting because we're expecting Jesus to return and it's a symbol that it's soon. You know, and if you follow the Temple Institute and, you know, all the plans that are going on there, they've already forged all the instruments. They've already trained the priests. In fact, they laid a cornerstone up on the Temple Mount, which really freaked the Muslims out a few years ago when they did that. So it looks like, you know, the groundwork has been laid to build a third temple. So what we're expecting is a kind of ecumenical, one world religion, you know, and it really is, you know, what Revelation 17 is talking about is the great harlot system, you know, the untrue faith, the woman that whores herself out to beliefs of any kind and doesn't take a stand on the truth, the exclusive truth claims of the gospel in the New Testament. You know, when you start allowing all these other belief systems and making your definition of truth so flexible that almost anything can be true, then you really just ran off the road into a ditch. And that's really what's happened in a lot of the liberal Catholic theology, a lot of the liberal theology in the Protestant churches. So, you know, I think that I see the groundwork in theology laid all across the board. I mean, from the evangelical Lutheran denomination to some of the other, you know, the Episcopalians. I mean, they're ordaining homosexual clergy and putting them in front of their congregations. You know, something that 1 Corinthians 6:9 says will lead you to hell. I mean, if you put leaders like that in front of your people, you know, what are you saying? I mean, they've abandoned sound theology. So I think Mystery Babylon, the Great Harlot, that system is just primed and ready to come together. And I think that something supernatural, and, you know, it really seems compelling to me that it's going to have something to do with this alien savior concept that we're talking about. That's going to make the whole world unite around something central, something that's so compelling and powerful that all these people of all these different beliefs are going to come together and worship at this temple, this newly rebuilt temple, probably in Jerusalem. And I think that the Vatican's going to be a major player in that.
Yeah, you know, let me break in here, Tom. Hey, Tom, let me break in with something you guys are talking about, the Zohar and the prophecy. And Chris, if I think it's right. A number of years ago, it's in my book, Long Walkers, which is a fictional account of pretty much everything. Just the characters are fictional. Some of the actual events are real. But in those days when a certain 4-star general, active duty and special operations, told me about a meeting under the Vatican, basically during the time of John Paul II's death. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this, Chris and Tom. I think you've probably seen the picture, but the world's leaders did get together. It was the who's who of every nation on the planet, and there was only one guy that ran out when the sacrifice of an actual child was taking place, and believe it or not, that was Hugo Chavez. And when Chavez went to the United Nations, he said George Bush was there. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard this story, but it's written up in my book, Long Walkers. But it's critical because, you know, the waiting for this meeting to take place, there has already been a meeting like that. An eyewitness who was a 4-star general happened to be there. And these guys were calling forth, and this is under the labyrinth of Rome, underneath the Roman cemetery. And the interesting thing about this is they actually conjured up, they brought forth a giant that's kept chained. And by the way, Henry Gruver was transported to Rome and commanded in the name of the Lord, while 3 other brothers were praying around the world. And giant chains came down, Tom, and literally encircled these 2 12-foot giants that, you'll love this, have leathery wings and look like reptiles, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So what I'm saying to everybody is this, is that, and if you would read that, Chris, again, the underground worship of the Long Walkers. Long Walkers is a special operations term for the giants that exist now. These are not spirit beings as such. These are physical giants. and they had a blood sacrifice of a baby girl, and all the leaders of the world were there. And it's interesting because they literally gave their power into the beast at that time. And the thing is that this ties right in with UFOs. And the fascinating thing about this is that Barry Kamish and others are all talking in the Russians, Gorky Park. They're talking about in Jerusalem seeing 9 foot tall to 12 foot tall, quote, giant aliens. And they're saying that in Russia. And the, what is it, Bornyov, not apparition, but the Bornyov landing of UFOs, there's giants involved in that. So what I'm saying is that what you just basically quoted of the Zohar is yet to come to pass. But when, and here's the critical point, when John Paul II died, that's when they had this, if you will, their conclave, and it was basically human sacrifice. So I'm saying this. I'm saying that specifically the one that the Zohar is talking about, the one that is yet to come, we've already got the precedent. And again, my source on that was an active duty general, a 4-star general, who gave it to me verbatim. I then turned it over to Brian Snowdy, my sketch artist. He's a guy that did the covers for my new book. By the way, the title of it's True Legend, and it's got a True Legends, and it's got a bunch of subtitles and explanations. But the point is that when the general saw Brian Snowdy's representation, he just said, I could not have photographed it any more perfectly. So what I'm telling you guys is this, is that we are talking about some of the most profane and disgusting calling forth of the damned and of the destroyers, and it's already taken place a number of years ago. It's in my book, Long Walkers, which I just want to spring into one more thing. When I put out Tom and Chris, I didn't know you then, but I knew Tom then. When I put out my Aliens and Fallen Angels, the sexual corruption of the human race, people didn't understand that the whole idea of the sexual messing with the seed of man was to destroy literally Adam's seed and Adam's lineage, just like they tried to do before the flood. And obviously God preserved Adam and Noah and his family, who were perfect in their generation. So gentlemen, we are on the verge of the most, most upsetting events in the history of the world. Jesus said men's hearts are going to fail them for looking after those things coming upon the earth. And I find it fascinating, Chris, that what you just quoted the Zohar literally took place 5 years ago, or whenever Pope John Paul II died. Not that it won't take place again, but I'm saying it happened already.
Well, and so, Steve, with what you're saying, this is Tom Horn again. Sorry, I can just jump in here if I can.
Sure.
Imagine this. I mean, really, honestly, imagine this. Imagine that you're out there and you're listening to this show. You're not a Christian. You're not a believer. Maybe you're a humanist, or you don't even know what you are. You don't believe in anything, maybe. But you're listening to this show. And records tell us. I checked today, by the way, Steve, in the show that you and I did with Mr. Hagman and his son a month ago. Today is on the front page as something like the #1 blog talk radio show in the world. So what does that tell us? That tells us that a ton of people around the world are listening to these broadcasts, and they're going to be listening to this one. So we know that there's a lot of people that are not Christians, or not believers, or not anything, or whatever. They're certainly not Christian. But so I would say to those people, imagine at least this, that you have a medieval Catholic prophecy that is almost 1,000 years old. This dates back almost halfway to when Jesus Christ walked upon the earth, and this mystic prophesied when the last pope would appear. And this coming month, March, the election will elect that pope that was seen over 1,000, or almost 1,000, over 900 years ago. Now, many believe in Catholicism and outside of Catholicism that this is basically the false prophet of end times biblical fame that helps give rise to the Antichrist. Now, contemporaneous to the arrival of that false prophet is this other prophecy from what's widely considered to be the most important work of Jewish Kabbalah. So now we're talking about two separate prophecies separated by hundreds of years, and we have no evidence that they knew each other. They certainly weren't reading each other's works, because the prophecy of the popes was hidden kept confined inside the Vatican until 1590. But here we have, what, 700 years ago, Jewish mystics, they come together, and they're trying to determine when they believe that their Messiah is going to appear. And in the Biera section of the Zohar, under the section called the Signs Heralding the Mashiach, or the coming of the Messiah, who would be for evangelicals and Catholics the Antichrist, because they rejected Jesus as Messiah, they talk about when will the Messiah appear. And Chris gave you the quote 5773, which in the Jewish calendar year began in the new moon, September 2012, and ends this September 2013. So in other words, right now, anytime, imminent, literally imminent, this Holy One's going to appear, and it's going to happen when the representation of the nations of the world is gathered in Rome. That's what the Jews said. Why in the world would the Jews have picked the Vatican, the Roman city, as the location where representation from the nations of the world would be gathered? So this sounds totally like a conclave, and the Holy One's going to shower on them fire and hail and meteoric stones. The prophecy of the Pope says that Rome will be destroyed. So the prophecies sound almost identical, but in the Zohar, after it mentions how Rome's going to be destroyed, it says, and from that time forward, the Messiah, this would be the Antichrist for us, will begin to declare himself, and round him there will be gathered many nations and many hosts from the uttermost ends of the earth, end quote. So you have a 900-year-old medieval Catholic prophecy, 700-year-old Jewish prophecy. Now, one other thing, and I just have to say this if I can, the false Messiah is predicted in this 700-year-old prophecy to appear in 2012, 2013. To that, you could add just a ton of strange attractors from throughout history that assign apocalyptic importance to something beginning in 2012 that unfolds through the following years and reaches its apex in 2016. And you know, when I spoke at the Branson conference this last year, when I spoke at Chuck Missler's conference, the Strategic Perspectives in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and these are all on tape, people can watch them, I said it is a mistake to think that the Maya, the Aztec, that they're all saying that the world's going to end in 2012. It's not what they say. It's not what they said. What they said was something's going to start in 2012. And that, of course, is when you had the re-election of Obama and other things around the world. It's going to start in 2012. But it's going to reach its culmination in the years that are following. That's also what the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States of America, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, that's what it says. Something's going to start in the year 2012. Chris Putnam, when we were writing Petrus Romanus, he and another guy uncovered fantastic, astonishing material, actually, about turn of the century evangelical preachers like Jonathan Edwards and William Reed, and just a huge, like 24 turn of the century preachers who all look forward to when will the false prophet and the Antichrist appear. And some of them also coupled it with the destruction of Rome. And guess what? Every one of them said it between 2012 and 2016. We're talking dozens. So what in the world? What was all of these seers? What was it that they were seeing that is the exact moment, if you're listening to this radio show, the exact moment we are living in right now, where Pope Benedict has stepped down like we predicted he would, and the conclave is gathering to elect who will be the final pope. And Steve, with everything that you were saying, I just think, here's what I think. I think that the world is at a point in time where the church is, some are going to awake. They're going to get where we're at right now. Events around the world are developing in support of the idea that at least the spirit, if not altogether the person, of the Antichrist and the false prophet are here. Petrus Romanus is here. And some believe he's going to be the one that's going to lead the world into acknowledging this Antichrist, either a person who points the world to an extraterrestrial savior, or is in fact the arrival of an extraterrestrial intelligence as the second coming of Jesus Christ. But it is a magnificent deception. In fact, I'm going to shut up, but if I get a chance to talk again, I need to make the second point about a case of conscience and what Guy Cosmonago was pointing us to.
Well, before you do that, and we'll let Chris have, we've got we've got a half an hour before you take the next break. Will you, one more time, it's really imperative, Tom, because I want to point out something when Chris is done. Would you explain what you were told real quickly by the astronomers / theologians on what the expected, if you will, appearance of this alien savior is going to look like? I mean, you can do it in a minute or two.
Do it right now?
Yeah.
Well, it isn't just one person. We're talking about dozens.
I understand, but give the overview of the creature, because it's going to springboard into something later on that's really critical.
This is what I was pointed to. That's expected to happen soon based on what they're writing and saying. When I queried further about the coming ET evangelists, I was told to look at James Blish's book, A Case of Conscience, which I was talking about a moment ago. And there is some information in that book about the seed of Satan and the coming of the serpent saviors. But I was also, and this is kind of strange, I was told to look at Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood End. At the very same time, Chris Putnam was writing about Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood End, in which you have this giant silver spaceship that appears in the skies above every major city on Earth. And after the dust settles, these mysterious overlords, they help form world government, right? It's going to end all. It's going to end all war, turn the planet into a utopia. Oddly, nobody gets to see the overlords, but a select few people. The purpose of the aliens, in fact, remains shrouded as they dodge questions for years. They stay in their spacecraft. They govern by proxy. But there is an overlord by the name of Carolyn, who is the supervisor for Earth. He's an alien god. And he speaks directly only to the United Nations Secretary General. Carolyn tells him the overlords are going to reveal themselves after 50 years, when humanity will have become used to and dependent on their presence. But when the revealing finally takes place, at the overlord's request, 2 children run into the ship. This is something that he asked them to do. And the crowd starts gathering around the ship to get a glimpse of what the alien overlord looks like. And here is how Arthur C. Clarke, and Chris should weigh in on this, because Chris did some documentation on how Arthur C. Clarke was able to foresee the future. He actually predicted a lot of things that we use now, the handheld iPads. He talked about all these things years before they even happened. But here's what he said about when these overlords who are coming, when we finally get a glimpse of them, here's what he said, quote, "There was no mistake. The leathery wings, the little horns, the barbed tails, all were there. The most terrible of all legends had come to life out of the unknown past. Yet now it stood smiling in ebon majesty, while the sunlight gleamed upon its tremendous body, and with a human child resting trustfully on either arm," end quote. So what has biblically been known as Satan or Lucifer and his angels will in the near future be revealed to be the true benefactors of the human race. That the gods who will arrive are going to be whom we always have thought until then to be the devil and his angels.
Chris, add in, chime in on that, because this is critical. This is so critical for people to understand. Lucifer's a light bringer. The New Agers all of those who are in Russ Dizdar's Black Awakening, they're all waiting for his appearance and his revealing to the world. So would you fill in where Tom just stopped?
Well, absolutely. Steve and everyone, you know, the reason why I was looking at this book, Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, it's a book about an alien invasion of Earth. And like Tom described, it turns out that the aliens look exactly like the classical demons that everyone always thought of. Leathery wings, the barbed tail.
Wow.
But, you know, like Tom said, I went through it. I did a...
Wow, Tricky, that's interesting. The dwarves and that around the clowns. Wow.
A study of Arthur Clarke's writings, and he has predicted future events over and over again. He predicted virtual reality. He predicted the news pad. He's predicted so many technologies and things that we take for granted today. He wrote about 30 years before they happened. Now, that doesn't mean that Childhood's End is going to happen literally the way he said, but it is suggested that he's onto something, because the things that he wrote have a habit of coming to pass. But the reason I really was interested in his book is not just the real obvious, you know, flying saucers and the demonic aliens, which is what we think is going on with the UFO phenomenon. We do think that it's demonic and present quite a few arguments to make that case. But what the real story of these overlords in Clarke's novel is that they end up transforming mankind. As the book continues, the children start to get psychic powers and weird occult things start happening. Nobody really understands what's going on. But by the end of the book, the human race is dissolved. There's no more humanity. Everyone is absorbed into this thing called the overmind. And we actually become a living consciousness, but we're no longer humans anymore. Now, what am I talking about? Well, if you listen to what the occultists believe, if you listen to what the alien contactees are saying, the New Agers, the Buddhists, the Hindus, and unfortunately, a lot of the liberal Catholic theologians, they're all pointing to the same thing. They're talking about what we call monism, this idea that all is one, all is becoming one, everything is spiritually evolving to this, it's really pantheism as well, to this living organism. And so it's a religious idea called pantheistic monism. And Arthur Clarke saw these alien overlords as instigating this religion, and really it happened on humanity. They didn't even have a choice in his book. Now, of course, we don't believe that that's really going to happen. We think that that is going to be part of the system. If you look at what Eastern religions teach. In Hinduism, you have Atman is Brahman, and Atman is the self, and Brahman is this essence, you know, this spiritual essence. And Atman is Brahman is a way of saying all is one. Now, in Buddhism, it's nirvana. The whole purpose of meditating is to lose yourself. You lose your identity and just to get absorbed into this nirvana thing, and you as an individual no longer exist. So this is the message that the alien entities, that the contactees and the abductees, they come back with the same kind of monism. All is one, you know, we're all spiritually evolving. We're going to ascend. You've heard these messages over and over again through the New Age movement, and almost every, you know, religion that's contrary to Christianity. This is the tension point, because Christianity makes exclusive truth claims. You know, we're saying, no, all is not one, and there's only one way to the real God, and it's through Christ. And they don't like to hear that. They want it to be open for everybody, this idea of pluralism, and you know, and it really all points to the same kind of idea. So I think that this theme is crucial to understanding the epistemology or the knowledge base of this one world religion. And I think that's what we're going to be hearing from these entities. And I think that's really the basis of it. And within Roman Catholicism, there has been a lot of theological groundwork laid through the writings of Pierre Teilhard Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest in the early 20th century. He was a paleontologist. He was an ardent Darwinist. He's credited with discovering some hominid skulls, trying to find the missing link. And some of those were actually found out to be forgeries and frauds. But Chardon wrote several books, and it's the same message. It's an evolutionary mysticism through a process he calls New Genesis. And New Genesis is leading toward Christogenesis. But when Chardon says Christ, he doesn't mean Jesus of Nazareth. He's talking about a cosmic consciousness. He's talking about all is one, the same message. And I uncovered some really amazing statements by Pope Benedict XVI. People talk about him like he's some kind of theological conservative, but he just dotes over Pierre Chardon in a lot of his books. And people are going to be quite shocked by the level that he endorses this idea, this mystical Darwinism. And it really all fits together with astrobiology and the idea of evolution. And it all really comes together. And we're going to lay all that out and expose what this kind of Eastern pantheistic monism religion that is coming upon the earth.
Well, it's the end, and this is, Tom, you and I did a show, or several shows over the last couple of years, where we're talking about singularity, we're talking about the end of mankind. Jesus' most amazing statement when he said, if the days weren't shortened for the elect's sake, there'd be no flesh left alive. And what's fascinating to me is, and I'll use the three-letter word, the sexual connotations of abductions, the absolute manipulation of the human genome, the triple helix, the fallen angels, even some of the guys that are writing books about fallen angels that, have sprung forth, they still don't understand the purpose, I don't believe, in the deception that's going to take place. But not only the deception, you guys, but also the entities that have already been produced. It's the old statement, how far ahead is mankind? I said 6,000 years in the past. Because what most people don't understand, we're talking about in the book of Enoch, in the book of Giants, those are Dead Sea Scroll fragments. We don't have the complete books. In the book of Adam and Eve and a lot of the pseudepigraphal writings, what we're talking about, I think some people think Adam was a hillbilly. Far from it. Adam was the most amazing creation, so much so that it brought rage into Lucifer. And it was so, I think, so telling and compelling. And by the way, when I tracked down the theory of evolution, Chris, you probably come across this too, but the fact is that if you will, the sages taught that God commanded the angels to worship his creation, not worship Adam and Eve, but worship God in that which he had created, that which was unique from the angels that bore his image and likeness. And it's attributed to Lucifer saying, I'm not going to worship those monkeys. Well, it's amazing how Lucifer's gotten the monkeys to worship him now. And I'm not trying to be cheekish on that statement, but where we're at, you guys, is we've got the most supernatural fooling around going on. We've got contempt for humanity. We've got a war that is not only now in the invisible heavenly realm, but that which was invisible in the heavenly realm is being brought into the visible realm. And the entire harmonics of creation, I don't mean it in the context of a New Age word, everything is changing, and the men who have yielded themselves to the deception and the seduction, Tom quoted the scripture, are now opening the doors, opening the portals. And why I wanted you, Tom, to go to the whole place there. You guys are quoting, Arthur C. Clarke and the works that he did is because pardon?
Oh, it's more than him. A lot more.
Yes, no, I understand. But I'm just trying to do this and get it out really quick. But we're talking about the same entities that basically were bound under the Vatican when Henry Gruber was teleported there. We're talking about the classic manifestation of demons and gargoyles. And when, again, people need to understand this, that it is the greatest deception that has ever happened. Jesus said there's never been anything like it. And these people are not vegans or vegetarians. They're not even people. That's a poor choice of words on my part. But what is critical for people to understand is that these entities, as they manifest themselves in our dimension, to say all hell is going to break loose, it's going to cause the believers, as I think, Chris, you already alluded to, the vilification, the persecution, and the ultimate destruction. Tom, you just detailed what their thoughts are and how, and Chris, on monism and pantheism. There's no room for exclusivism in the gospel's claims. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we're up against, and the foreign God, the alien God, is going to do everything he can with lying signs and wonders and all the forbidden technology, all the forbidden archaeology that the Illuminists, the Luciferian worshippers through the ages have contained unto themselves, will be loosed, and as it's all loosed and revealed, it will all have their spin on it. Is that pretty accurate, Tom?
Pretty accurate, but I don't want to reveal yet document statements. We're still investigating. We're still meeting. The whole thing that we're doing right now, I mean, we are rushing to try to get this done, but the truth is, I'm supposed to have a meeting with the Collins Elite. We're having discussions with Vatican insiders. People are asking us, how in the world did we know? How did we know? How did even Hagman and Hagman on their website, if they're for Blog Type, they put up, prophecy is unfolding before our eyes. We predicted this 3 weeks before it happened. Well, we predicted it a long time before 3 weeks. Putnam and I wrote about this. It was published over a year ago, which means we were doing investigative work over this over a year ago. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. What's strange is I've never done investigative research in my life where both times, last year this was true, this year it's true, where right while we're meeting with people, we feel the pressure. Last year we felt the pressure because we were told that Benedict was going to step down on his birthday in April. So we were feeling this enormous pressure to hurry up, get everything done, put it in print, get it out there. And then after the fact, we thought, well, we didn't have to be in such a big hurry because he didn't resign. Well, then we just learned this week, in fact, he did resign, and we were exactly right. Now we're feeling the same thing. We still are trying to meet with people. We're trying to follow up on leads. And yet now we're being told that literally in 3 weeks from right now, the conclave is going to meet to vote in Petrus Romanus. And this could literally set in motion the downward spiral, the snowball rolling down the hill to bring about the culmination of the kind of end times prophetic events that Christianity has been standing back talking about for over 2,000 years, and now it's unfolding. And if Chris and I are going to be, responsible with what the Lord has given us, we feel this pressure all of a sudden. We got to hurry up and put this out there. But between you, I, Chris Putnam, the Hagman father and son investigative team, and the listening audience, I mean, we're still right in the middle of this investigation. And look, let me go back to something. Guy Cosmonalgo pointed us to for the pattern that is guiding the new papal proclamation. Just keep that in mind. Don't even try to figure out what I mean yet. Just keep it in mind. That's coming. And that reflects the new astrotheological position of Rome. There is a code inside the book, A Case of Conscience, that Cosmonalgo pointed us to, and it involves wordplay around the term lithium.
Hey, Tracy, good to see you.
I had to decode this. Blish, the author, he makes this very obvious connection to the name of the planet and its inhabitants as reflecting the abundance of lithium ore on the alien world that can be mined and exploited for use in nuclear weapons. But that's not really what's happening here, because mention of the goddess Eileithyia is missing from the work entirely. And it was the first thing that jumped off the pages at me, because the book is talking about a papal proclamation concerning the seed of Satan. It's talking about the Jesuit position with regard to great deception and aliens and all that, going to be there's going to be this great deception because nobody's going to follow the priest in the book. Nobody's going to follow. Now I'm losing his name. Ruiz Sanchez. Nobody's going to follow his opinion. Fact is, they're bringing up in front of the Vatican court, and they charge him with heresy. And this is one of the things you're going to find out, that in the current development of Jesuit and Opus Dei level Vatican academics, this is a fact, that to not believe in the aliens and their doctrine is what's going to define you as a heretic. Not believing in them is going to define you as a heretic. So I'm given this codex, right, a case of conscience. I'm looking at it, and immediately the whole fact that they talk about lithium, but they never talk about the god Ilithia, and yet the whole planet is named Ilithia, and the people that live there are called the Lithians. Well, that stood out to me as incredible because I thought we were going to a break there, because the doctrine around Ilithia from ancient times fits perfectly with what Father Ruiz Sanchez in the book discusses about the seed of Satan being debated back on the church by the earth, because Lithia was the goddess that was
I never knew that. Wow.
guard, protect in antiquity the seed of the serpent, that in turn generates the birth of the serpent child and actually the future serpent savior. As a matter of fact, if people want to Google this, so important was the goddess Ilithia's role in ancient times as the preserver of the serpent seed toward the birth of the serpent savior, that shrines were erected to her by cult followers all throughout Greece.
That reminds me, we should ground this in ancient text. We're talking about science fiction. We're talking about these alien gods that are serpents. But, one thing I'd just like everyone to realize is that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we're talking about ancient Jewish literature from, dated by scholars at 100 BC. Now, you can Google this. The scrolls are given codes. It's 4Q544. Now, that's a scroll. Now, in that scroll, it describes a watcher. Now, you've heard us talking about the watchers in the book of Enoch, and the book of Daniel in canonical scripture talks about watcher angels. Now, in that scroll, when you Google it, you'll find this. There is a watcher named Melchishra, and it describes Melchishra as looking like a viper, as a reptilian. Okay, this is from 100 BC. So this is not science fiction. This is grounded in ancient texts. So this is not just something that that we're making up from science fiction about aliens or something. I mean, you can look this scroll up and read the description of Melchishra for yourself, and you'll see that the idea of a serpent figure is not a new one.
Yeah, exactly right. And so when you look at what Cosmonologo, tells us to look at a particular book to try to understand what the theology of the new astrotheology is grounded in, so important was this goddess Ilithia's role in ancient days as the preserver of the serpent seed toward the birth of the serpent savior, that shrines were literally erected to her all throughout ancient Greece. And in fact, it's interesting, you can even find a little bit of this, not much, but a little bit, in Wikipedia, in which you see these terracotta figures, these immortal nurses that are being depicted watching over the divine children in whom the bloodline would survive. For example, on the mainland of Olympia, there's a shrine dedicated to Ilithia that was witnessed by the traveler and 2nd century geographer Pausanias.
G'day, Ricardo. Welcome.
There's this small chamber sacred to the serpent savior that hosts a a virgin priestess who's caring for the serpent, blah, 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 blah. But it's a shrine. It's a shrine. But read the language there and how interesting it is and how Catholic it sounds, because the shrine memorializes the appearance of a Marian-like woman who appears with a babe in her arms. And actually the drawings look very much like we're talking about Mary and the baby Jesus. And she appears at this crucial moment. And then the baby is placed on the child. But guess what the messianic baby does? He changes into this terrifying serpent and drives away the enemies of the Ilians. This myth of Aletheia is very central to that work that Cosmonagle pointed us to. But what's also interesting, Steve, Aletheia was connected in history to the birth of Apollo. Does that surprise you?
Not at all.
Whose coming as the promised seed formed the Novus Ordo Seclorum prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States. Once again, the Messiah who's going to return to rule the earth in the latter days. But this is also the same personality that's described in the book of 2 Thessalonians as the Antichrist, who becomes the progeny, the incarnation of the ancient seed or the spirit of Apollo. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 describes that. Revelation 17:8 describes that. And these verses elucidate a very important central eschatological issue concerning how all of the Bible is really a story about the ancient and the future struggle between the seed of the woman, Jesus, and the seed of the serpent from Genesis 3:15.
It is amazing to me, too, that I'm just looking at something about Aletheia, and they even talk about her being a Hyperborean. I don't know if you saw that, but I think it's fascinating because that brings it into the Nazi occultism, and she was venerated by the Nazis. And what's important about that is that the old gods and goddesses are absolutely, how should I say this, being reanimated and brought forth into the dimension. I believe that God literally shut them all out for our protection, and now all these evil men, in conjunction with all the fallen angels and all of the intellect and intelligence that were given to them, are literally opening up the gates, like Tom, your book, Armon Gate. And so the fascinating thing is that there is nothing new under the sun, and the ancient gods and goddesses, and again, like Apollyon, the destroyer. I mean, we are literally seeing those names of those deities, and demigods is a better word, and fallen angels and their offspring literally coming back into our dimension. And one of the fascinating things, and I'll share this with you guys, I've shared it on the Coast to Coast before, is they have a group of gentlemen, whether it's a tomb of Gilgamesh, whether it's Nimrod's last burial place, that do nothing but scour the earth for that which was believed to be the remains of the giants, produced fallen angels, earthly women producing the giants, for the strict purpose of reconstituting them. And I think that's what is more than fascinating when you get into the Egyptian priesthood. Obviously, we've got the modern day portrayals, even of the President of the United States as a pharaoh. We've got the rebuilding of the temple. We've got the issues that are before us, but it all basically is just like it was in the beginning. God in the powers of heaven are at war with the Satan and the powers of hell, and now earth is a battlefield, and we are going to see the most profound outpicturing, and we're going to be participating. Should we be still left here? And by that I mean in a living form instead of being absent from the body and present with the Lord. We're going to see this stuff play out. But the deception, as Chris and you guys have detailed, is of a supernatural force, if you will, that cannot just be discerned with the natural mind. I think that's why the spirit of discernement, is in 1 Corinthians is going to be so important, because people are going to have to come to the point where they look to the Lord, look to the Bible, get God's discernment, and see things through God's eyes, because everything that we're going to be dealing with, I believe, and are dealing with, from the lightning striking the Vatican, is bottom line is we're going to be seeing nothing but illusions and delusions, and we're going to see lying signs and wonders to take the hearts of the people who still believe in the living God to try and take them away from the living God. And that's the bottom line of what they're trying to do.
Folks, this is a good point to stop right now for a break for the AM stations that are picking us up, as well as the FM stations. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to a very historic broadcast, and certainly we're humbled to be a part of the or provide the forum for three of the most well-versed gentlemen you could possibly have on the topic at hand. Mr. Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com, Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, authors of Petrus Romanus, and of course their upcoming book Exo Vaticana. You're listening to the Hagmann and the Hagmann Report. We're going to be back in about 3 minutes. To stay with us. Oh, and by the way, I want to tell you that you're getting about 6.5 hours of normal broadcasting with this broadcast tonight. So fantastic, folks. This hour is brought to you by Grandland Firearms. That's GrandlandFirearms.com.
Special Thursday, Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2013 edition of the Hagmann Report. We are joined by some very special guests tonight, Steve Quayle being one of them, and then Tom Horn and Chris Putnam, both authors of Petrus Romanus, The Last Pope, and Exo Vatican, their new book that they are working on, soon to be released. And it's been a fascinating 2 hours, and I guess I'll just let you guys go where we stopped at.
Well, Joe, before you do that, Steve, are you there? Are you back on, Steve? Steve, do we have you back on?
Let's see. He's on. Might be away from the.
All right. When he comes back on, and gentlemen, I hopefully you don't mind. I've got to ask him about his book, Aliens and Fallen Angels, because a lot of what I'm hearing, I read, I believe, in his book, Aliens and Fallen Angels. And it seems like, Steve, are you back? Okay. Do we have Chris and Todd back?
I'm here.
All right. And I want to say this, too, ladies and gentlemen. We're very, very honored, again, to have both Tom Horn and Chris Putnam. I mean, for goodness sakes, I just, when I learned that Chris Putnam was going to be on with Tom Horn, I mean, Tom is great, obviously, but the two of them, holy cow, what a gift! And I mean that, what a gift. We're very humbled to be provide the forum.
I've heard Mr. Putnam, you were on Rick Wiles earlier this week. I got a chance to listen to that show, and I've heard you guys on several other shows. And fantastic job you guys do. And a lot of people really are interested in what you have to say. And they were interested before. And with the events we saw last week, they're very interested now. And there's a lot more of them.
And Mr. Putnam, I got to tell you, you got me through a very rough night the other night as I listened to you on Coast to Coast with George Norrie. I got to tell you, it was fascinating. I've just, you did such a great job. And I want to
Thank you very much.
You know, and both of you. And by the way, folks, I've got the book Petrus Romanus right in my hot little hand right here. What a fantastic book. I've got the DVD that came with it as well. Tremendous documents in that. So I just want to say, you know, if folks, grab this book, grab the package. What a great. And I'm not hawking books. It's just a fantastic book. It's got a lot of information.
I do. I have a question real quick for the beginning of the third hour for either Mr. Horn or Mr. Putnam. The prophecies of St. Malachi. And I've known about these for a while. My father and me have talked about them many times in the past. Have you guys done any research into the authenticity of the prophecies? Some people have different opinions that maybe it was added afterwards or it isn't as it seems.
Well, I think 1595, I think, is we can verify it, authenticated beyond that, right?
Yeah, I mean, after studying the history of the prophecy of the popes, Chris did a significant amount of research on this, so I can let him speak. But we actually took a very critical view of the prophecy, and it's our opinion that anything pre-1595 can't be trusted. That there was obvious attempts at forgery. There was, we know that there was in 1590 an attempt to promote a cardinal by the name of Simon Selly to the College of the Cardinals, and that the original document was altered to try to convince the electors that he was named as the individual who should be elected. But this really goes to the deeper argument that after it was published in 1595, we now have the document. Why does it continue to be astonishingly accurate in its fulfillment? And why would it have been altered to try to convince the College of Cardinals if they didn't put any stock in it in the first place? And this actually kind of goes against some of the media out there right now that are arguing and that are saying, well, you know, there's some Catholics that put stock in it, but officially the Vatican don't, you know, they don't really put a lot of stock in it. Actually, the behavior of the Vatican is antithetical to that argument, and the history proves that, in fact, they did put stock in it and that the College of Cardinals have been using it. And by the way, I should say, we would be remiss not to address the question that's on so many people's minds out there right now concerning who Chris and I think will be the next pope. And we did create a top 10 list that's in our book, Petrus Romanus. And what's interesting is that most of the media out there right now, including ABC, NBC, MSNBC, they're using our top 10 list to create their stories about who the Papabili are. But I want to say something. A year ago, in our list, Cardinal Tarcisio, Peter the Roman Bertone, was in our top 10 list. Now, he still is in our top 10, and you'll find that therefore he's also in a lot of other people's top 10. But there are issues that have developed, and I don't know how much time we have to discuss the intricate details about this. There are issues that have developed since that might not have Peter Bertone as the number one pick. Cardinal Peter Turkson was also in our top 10. Right now, he's the number one pick on the odds makers. Cardinal Angelo Scola was also in our top 10, and right now he's also in the top 10 of most of the odds makers. But there's a couple who have emerged since we wrote the book. Benedict, had another election in which he raised up other cardinals who are now possible contenders. There is a Peter in Cardinal Peter Erdo, who's a Hungarian cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church that serves as an archbishop in Budapest. He's a primate. He's only 61 years old. He could be a surprise Peter the Roman. And then there's another possibility in Cardinal Bakara Batros Rahi, who's only 72. And his name, Batros, means Peter in Arabic. And when you pronounce the baby name Batros in Arabic, it is announced Petros. He was literally born in Lebanon, where of course the Watchers descended on Mount Hermon, but maybe that's a different subject. But he's on record supporting the Hezbollah's right to use arms against Israel, and he actually looks forward to the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is one of the other possible contenders. And then finally, I would say that whoever is elected as Peter the Roman, his name really doesn't have to be Peter. Most Catholic scholars understand that whoever takes the papacy is sitting in the seat of Peter. And once they begin ruling from the Vatican, they are ruling from Rome. So in one essence, in a very nebulous sense of the word, the prophecy that is in the prophecy of the popes could literally just be telling us he will be the final pope, Peter the Roman. In one sense, every pope is Peter the Roman. Now, having said that, I have a feeling that it's going to be something more than that. I have a feeling that the prophecy implies something, and we talk about that both in the first and second books. And I'm not trying to sell a book. I'm just saying that when you get right down to where the rubber meets the road, there is a lot of research and investigative work, and even to the point in the first book of hiring a private investigator. And then there's a very dark side of this that I don't know if we'll have time to talk about tonight, but there is testimony from among numerous highly placed church experts who told us about Satan worship in the Vatican. And these I'm talking about from Monsignors, from cardinals, that may play into who the individual was who was born at a particular period of time in whom the spirit of Petrus Romanus was at least ritualistically incarnated.
Wow.
I would like to field, the initial question about, the authenticity and those issues, because that's something that I really dug into quite deeply. And I think that our book, Petrus Romanus, probably has the best accounting of that you're going to find out there, because I went and read every book I could find about the prophecy of the popes. And I read books that aren't in English and translated them, books from Italian and books in French, and, books from different Jesuits, critics of it, believers in it. And I digested everything I could possibly find in this book. And it's really in the first couple of chapters you'll find most of this material. But, one of the Catholic scholars that he really believes the prophecy. And this guy has PhDs. His name is John Lupia, and he's actually the editor of the Roman Catholic News, and you can find that linked on the internet. He absolutely believes in this prophecy. He's a high-ranking priest, and he maintains a media that is a pretty prominent media for Roman Catholics. Now, according to him, his opinion is that this prophecy actually surfaced in 1556, and he cites some references to it by a Vatican librarian. Now, his opinion is that the prophecy was kind of hidden away, and then this Vatican librarian discovered it. So when we're talking about that maybe the early part of it has been altered, there is strong evidence for that, and I explain it in the book, but what we notice, and here's why we know what we know. Okay, there was this Vatican librarian. His name is Oniferus Panvinius, okay? He wrote a famous book on the history of the popes in 1557. Now, at this time, there's not a lot of books available for people. And this was like the authoritative history of the popes. So what we noticed is the Malachi prophecy from 1139 to right around this time that this book, reaches up to, like the 1550, it matches his book to the T. Now, what's a dead giveaway is that there's some anti-popes. That there was times in the Roman Catholic system where there was more than one claimant to the papacy. There was, there was all kinds of tensions between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, and sometimes there was more than one person who laid claim to the papacy. So sometimes there would be a pope and an anti-pope. There would actually be two. Now, what's interesting is that this history of the popes by Panvinius makes some mistakes. He didn't get it all perfect. Sometimes he put the wrong guy in the wrong place. And what's interesting is that the way that the Malachi prophecy is phrased in the earlier part, it follows Panvinius's book so accurately that it even copies the same mistakes. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a dead giveaway that somebody took the early text of that prophecy and they tried to fix it by making it match the authoritative source. So if you were a cardinal and you wanted to check the Malachi prophecy, you would go get Panvinius's book and go, let's see if it really matched. And that's the way you would do it. So we can tell that somebody did do that. The thing is his book only went up to like 1557. And that's why Rene Thibault, the guy I was talking about earlier, he actually thinks that the part of the prophecy that was never altered started around 1570. So that's where he put it. And there's really, there's good reasons that why these scholars think that, because they can tell, when if Panionius' book doesn't exist anymore, and they didn't really have anything to copy. So there's also in 1571, there was an English Catholic named Nicholas Sanders, and he actually wrote a book, and he seems to have mentioned something about the Malachi prophecy in the book. He even makes a statement to measure time. Nothing is more advisable than this series of Roman pontiffs. And he kind of makes all these little references. And his book was called From the Monarchy of the Visible Church. And it's an Irish book, but a lot of people think that he mentioned that text. So it was around before 1595, and we can see it. And most people think that probably this Vatican librarian was the one that matched it up to his book, and they used it for some kind of propaganda to try to get somebody elected pope. But see, what they did is they altered a document of 112, and they didn't have any reason to alter the ones way into the future. So that's why what we see in the future actually is more prophetic and more supernatural than the earlier part.
Okay, that's a great explanation. And thank you for that, because, and you do go into that very well into your book, Petrus Romanus. Now, Steve, you're back. I just want to, if I can, circle back around here, because on my desk, not next to Petrus Romanus, I've got your book, Steve, Aliens and Fallen Angels. Yeah, it almost seems like what we're talking about tonight. There could be this is all connected. Steve, what you wrote and what Mr. Horn and Mr. Putnam wrote are tied at the hip, so to speak. Wouldn't you agree with that, or?
Well, yeah, and Doug, it's kind of interesting. By the way, Chris and Tom, if we had to put our mutual efforts together, we should call it the University of Antiquity, or UNIVANT for short, and give the people that like acronyms something to, mull over, especially our critics. Just a little something I threw in. When I wrote Aliens and Fallen Angels, the sexual corruption of the human race, what I was led to do, Doug, was to basically lay out the foundation and the thought process, first and foremost, from Scripture. And Tom and I both basically quote a lot of the same sources about the UFO phenomenon. But what's interesting is the realm of antiquity and all the reports in antiquity and all of the petroglyphs and all of the different things that took place. And then the thing that no one could account for in history outside of very few men over the last 2,000 years was the presence of giants and the amazing amount of technology, architecture, science, and the feats of mighty men of renown. Obviously, Tom quotes the book of Genesis on Nimrod, began to become a Gibborim, and all the different words in the Bible. I still am at odds with some people. I won't even argue with it over Nephilim and Rephaim. But the fact is that what we're talking about is the sexual corruption of the human race. That's the purpose of what the fallen angels had to do, because God made mankind so incredibly wonderful, such a reflection of him. And he wanted something that was so unique, even in heaven and all creation throughout the universe, that wonderful representation of someone made in his image and likeness. The scripture says that obviously the angels, he maketh his angels ministers of fire. But the point I'm trying to make is in my book, Aliens and Fallen Angels, which, by the way, of all the things I've written to date, I believe that one's been more responsible for winning scientists and skeptics, agnostics to the Lord. Because one thing, Tom can say amen to this, you don't hear this stuff at the Assembly of God summer camps, and you don't hear this stuff at the Lutheran Seminary and Dallas Theological Seminary and Fuller Seminary, and all the different seminaries don't teach this stuff. So there's a hunger, there's a reason why I would say that when people listen to, I'm going to answer your question real quickly, Doug, when people listen to me or Tom or Chris on Coast to Coast, you'd be surprised how many of those people are no longer in churches, but they're believers and they're hungry for the truth. And so the thing is that when I wrote Aliens and Fallen Angels, that was kind of my springboard into bringing people into the understanding that we're not talking about a 20th century phenomenon. We're talking about Genesis 3:15. We're talking about what the ancient Vedic text, the Indian from India, Sanskrit writings, and as I'm doing right now, just to bring everybody up to speed, as I'm talking to Native Americans across the country, the reports of big feet, Bigfoot, I guess you'd call them big feet in plural, Sasquatches. The point is that their portals are opening, gates are opening, people are seeing literally skinwalkers, they're seeing all these things, and it's like a time code. Tom, I believe in Chris, you guys basically, when you write about these things, it's almost like it's the time sequence that Daniel was speaking about when the angel told him it was sealed up for the appointed time. I believe when we talk about transhumanism from a Christian perspective, when we talk about stargates, when we talk about star men, every Native American legend, and I'm tracing literally hundreds of them right now, all go back to the stars, whether it's a Hopi, whether it's a Navajo, whether it's a Paiute, the Sioux, the Blackfeet. There are so many intricacies. And when you get to the East Coast Indians and Native Americans, and you get up into the Canadian, Northern Canadian, it's fascinating what's going on. Here's what I'm trying to say. I've searched the world. I think that's a fair statement. I've basically cataloged, and there's some stuff I haven't found yet because I've only been doing this for 40 years, and it'll probably take another, so many years before the Lord shows me what to go next. But where I'm being led is the same place, Chris, I don't know if you heard the time that Tom and I were on last time, but I'm being led to the same point that Tom and Chris were when they went to basically see the Vatican telescope in Arizona. It's not just Arizona, but the desert Southwest. I put up photographs of the Grand Canyon. I've spoken to special operations guys who have found giant sarcophagus with Egyptian hieroglyphics in the Grand Canyon. They're sealed off. You go there, the remote sensors call the boys and the helicopters in on you and everything else. But the point that I'm trying to make is, ladies and gentlemen, what Chris and Tom are telling you in Exo Vaticano when it comes out, Petrus Romanus, their track record speaks for itself. The Bible says a man's gift makes way for him. And so God is using the writings of Chris, the writings of Tom together, individually, me, to be the if you will, the bow on the icebreaker. This ice has to be broken in order for, the first part of an icebreaker that hits the ice is the one that gets the greatest beating. But then others can come through in that channel. And so, Doug, what you're saying here is simply this. Aliens and fallen angels, the sexual corruption of the human race, there is no more definitive title I could come up with than to explain civilization.
Hey, guys, we'll go to miles from around the world and come back to that. Where is it? No, that's not it. Oh, hang on, guys. Man, I didn't load it. Paul Begley. Got him.
Like a global system that's already in place that uses specifically money, right? Specifically money. I've seen that. So that horse is gone. And they've been working on this. One of my greatest points would be Jesus broke these seals, these spirits, I'll call them spirits, down to the earth.
Yep.
People have these in their mindset. They have been working towards these goals since Christ was resurrected, sat at the right hand of the Father.
Amen.
Death has been increasing by all those means. So I believe they're out of the stall. I believe they've been working. We're just getting to the point where we actually begin to see the effects of these spirits in the earth. And it's getting a lot worse, especially this year, than at any other time.
So in other words, and folks who got back around the world with us tonight, we're so glad he's with us, special Friday night edition. I'm in agreement with you. I'm glad you agree with me that, yes, these horses are out of the stall and they seem to be increased everything. There's no doubt all four horsemen of the apocalypse, all of their categories are increasing. And this year will probably be the worst ever for all four. Let me ask you a question, Mike, because this is really weird. We had the we had the train derailment in Ohio. We had the truck crash in Arizona with hazmat material. We had the train derailing in Detroit. I think last week you told us there was 2 cars on that train that's supposed to have had hazardous material, and the public was not aware of it. We had a plant in Ohio, a metals plant explode, 1 dead, 13 injured. And then so this morning they sent a plane out of Arkansas with 5 environmental consulting firm employees to go and review the plant fire in Ohio, and their plane crashes and kills all 5. Okay? Do you believe in coincidences, or should I think that something nefarious is going on here?
Wait, I know we have the pulses coming through. I know we have that. As far as coincidences, no, I don't believe in coincidences. But there's one subject nobody's talking about.
All right.
Nobody is. And it's always that one subject nobody is talking about. That is normally an operation because no one is mentioning it. Remember something, any event in the world is always taking people by surprise. It's taking them by surprise because there are areas of life people forget about if they're not spoken about. There's one specific area that no one is talking about, and that's terrorism, right?
Right.
No one is talking about terrorism.
You're right.
And so for a long time,
Okay, I think my Wi-Fi might have dropped out. Hang on. Yeah, it did. Hang on, guys.
and of course in 2009, 2010, Christ was totally washed away, but Islam was propped up. You heard that name everywhere.
Yep.
Right now, you don't know what the loyalties of an individual are who have legitimate positions, but they may have a faith that is not conducive of American ideologies and the faith of Christians in this country. So I believe a lot of these accidents that you're seeing are sabotage. For example, the train derailments. That is absolute neglect. That's neglect.
Yeah.
Maintenance companies, right? They go through strict standards to put a train car on the rails and to approve it to go. This is just something they do all the time. But I'm noticing more and more there are maintenance flaws and issues, unchecked things that go kind of like Boeing did with some of their aircraft some years back. But when you investigate, you find that the individuals had a loyalty to a different faith other than Christianity. In every single case, that happened in Boeing, that happens at Norfolk Southern, that happens in a lot of these steelworking plants, manufacturing facilities. You'd be surprised how many people are loyal and hate America, but they're here, right? They were born here, but they hate this country because of their faith.
Wow.
And so nobody is speaking about terrorism. And I'll just say it bluntly, I believe that many of these cases are sabotage, and it's increasing, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And you're not talking about somebody who's a janitor. No. You're talking about executives who can erase their trails, who can assign different tasks to individuals for extra money. So it's very easy in America, Pastor Paul, to pay anybody $10,000 to get them to do just about anything in America. It's very easy. It's very easy.
So Pemex, the company Pemex, today hit by fires in 3 different facilities in one day. 5 people are missing, presumed dead. 8 people hospitalized in one fire. Another fire broke out in a separate town, same company, Pemex, in that facility. And then in Pemex, Deer Park, Texas, an oil refinery owned by Pemex exploded and went on fire. Do you believe that 3 now there's 2 things. One, sabotage, terrorism, as you're saying, and the other part is, as you said, as these waves of energy come in, there's going to be plant explosions and eruptions. Chemicals are going to explode. I mean, this one here, you have to be suspicious of terrorism, but then again, you have to always consider what else could be the cause, because it's happening in a lot of places.
That's true. And as far when you're dealing with chemical plants, when you have those volatile agents or compressed agents that could easily, the nucleus could be knocked out and they could change their inert properties. That could easily happen. But one of my issues is you have these companies who, by the way, and it's so strange. I don't believe in coincidences, but you also had a billionaire who purportedly committed suicide. But this billionaire, if anybody looks into this billionaire, they're going to find that this guy was one of the architects of LBOs. And that is when you that's a leverage buyout. In other words, if people saw the movie Pretty Woman, right?
Yeah.
That's what this guy did. He was the architect behind that, right? So he would take and take some of the debts, and essentially here's what it is. You take the debts of a company, you leverage them to buy out the debts of other companies and everything else. So you're taking what Americans owe to a company. You're utilizing that to purchase or acquire another company.
Yep.
And then it takes maybe 6, 7, 8 years for everybody to get their money back. This guy was an architect of that. I know a lot of people say he was a good fella, this, that, and the other, but I'll tell you something. That's a pretty, that business that he was doing, making all that money in. There could have been a slew of things going through his mind.
He capitalized on troubled companies that get going. Let's say you have an entrepreneur, he's growing his company too fast, he doesn't have the capital, he has to borrow. Then, he loses a customer. Now he's down so many millions, maybe in debt. He can't catch up. And somebody comes along and says, don't worry about it. I'm going to be your sugar daddy, basically. I'm going to be a venture capitalist. I'm going to buy into your company so much, you pay me the debt. Well, when you can't pay the debt, eventually you take the company. It becomes yours. And then he would sell the company. Usually what they do is they sell up the assets, or they sell the company to a bigger company that's in the same industry. And then the guys that he used their money to do this with, they get a nice return of 12 or 14%, which is way better than you're going to get if you're putting your money in the bank. That's what you're saying. But that ruins lives. It does wreck lives. People get laid off. Factory owners who own the plants go broke or barely get enough to keep their shirt on, and that's about it. So
yeah, they end up losing a lot.
Yeah.
And of course it is, his portfolio, he had returns of up to 70 to 80 to 90%. So he was doing good financially. But he was also a person of conviction. And now here's what happens. If you architect something with an idea involved and it turns sour, you're going to have some heavy conviction from what you've done, right? From what you've unleashed. Because once this LBO process, which by the way is connected to other processes, once you start something like that, you can't shut that down. People capitalize on this and they begin to, like monsters, go out there and do things like the Lehman Brothers. They went through that same process. These guys amassed all those assets buying debts. That's a very tricky business, but you also have a time period that companies have to wait and everybody's broken.
Okay, Kelly, good night. God bless.
He may have had the money, but how could a person sit there with themselves knowing that they have ruined the lives of a great many people who will not see a return for another 10 years in this economy, right? That's awful. It could have been a case of that, right? I think this guy actually saw what he unleashed. That's my personal opinion. I think he saw what was unleashed. I think he had no power to stop it. I think he sees what's happening in our government and what lengths are willing to go to.
Okay, vast thing. I have no idea what that word means. I've never seen it before. So what's it actually mean, brother?
Prove a political point. We have a political war right now that spans the globe, and there will be a winner. He also knows if he's a billionaire, he has knowledge of who has real power in this world, and that could be shocking if they let you into their little side. And I'll say something else. The beast everybody is looking for, this beast, this guy, is going to rise, and fairly quickly. And I believe that word is starting to get out to those who really have stake in the world's economy. As a billionaire, he has a stake. He's a stakeholder in the world's economy at a high level as a billionaire. Upon learning that, how do you live with yourself, knowing what you're feeding, knowing what you're empowering? He may not have been able to live with that.
You're exactly right. And you start thinking about that. You start thinking, does he realize?
Doesn't jump.
He's 78 years old. So, yeah, does he really realize just where his life is and what avenue he took? How many lives he might have destroyed along this way?
Yep.
And you start working, and you wonder about some of these guys out there. It's got unbelievable amounts of wealth.
He won't be the last. He
No.
will not be the last, Pastor. There's something that there's a beast. This beast is most certainly 100% rising right now. He's rising right now.
Amen to that. Folks, Mike around the world's with us tonight. We're talking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It seems like they have certainly opened. It seems like that they're not open, I should say. Yeah, they're open. That's right. Jesus is the one that broke the seals. He's broke them already. And as Mike says, they're galloping. Mike, also, while we're talking about this, China, we know what happened. Harris went to Germany. She threw Putin pretty well under the bus and called him out and said, look, they are committing atrocities. Justice must be served. So basically, the line was drawn between NATO and Russia. And then China steps up and says, well, oh, by the way, just for the record, Taiwan belongs to us. And then today we have a Chinese fighter jet confronts a U.S. Navy plane. Here it is. And just so happens CNN was on board. Kind of convenient. But what's your take on this? This is becoming almost an everyday occurrence, isn't it?
Yeah, well, China is they're pretty emboldened. They have some pretty high-tech things. And in their minds, probably, well, you have admirals, you have generals who are concerned about China. They're concerned about a war with China. In fact, there were a couple of generals who posted their memos got out. And, of course, it never really picked up pace, but they're very concerned. They know we're going to have to go to war with China. They know for a fact we're going to have to go to war with China. And it's not going to be some easy war because China, a lot of people just simply don't know about the tech that China has. They don't know about their technology. They have no idea that China was one of the first ones to have a Gen 6 fighter, right? And we're getting down to calling people's bluff. And this is where Christians are going to have to be sober. There are a couple of things coming about. It's going to require great sobriety from Christians. I know that countries always have their citizens believe in them, right?
Right.
But the whole world's about to see the truth. Pastor Paul, somebody's bluff is going to be called. And let me just say this. In order for China to approach an American plane on patrol, that plane was not by itself. It has air coverage from the ground and sea. How in the world can a Chinese plane, given the technology that floats around in people's minds that the USA has, that is not classified, well, it's kind of classified, but it's on the ships, why don't we ever use it, right? I have to bring up the balloons again. All these balloons flying over. A tracer or a trace track will show the origin of anything in the sky. You can tell where birds come from. You can tell where swarms of insects come from. But you mean to tell me they can't tell where a balloon comes from? And by the way, that balloon was flying in a very disputed part or a very sensitive part of the atmosphere. The higher you get, the more coverage is up there in the atmosphere, right above 15,000 feet. Militaries can see a net, right? Flying in space. They can track where it came from. Yes.
From space?
How could they not identify a balloon?
When
it's a fact, Pastor Paul. From space, they can analyze. If you threw a handkerchief on the ground, from space, they can analyze what that material is and who was the manufacturer. So how could they not identify a balloon? The truth is they could identify a balloon, right? No one dropped the ball. These are automated systems. There's something fishy going on here. And I'm telling you, it goes back to politics. It also goes back to a forced kingdom. Something that's this kingdom that's being put in place is going to be forced upon everybody. People are going to find themselves powerless to do it. And you mentioned China whizzing by our fighters. Right. They get more confrontational than that. It's only a matter of weeks, probably, before one of the second incursions. Right now, under the water, people can't track that. There have been incidences underneath the oceans concerning China and the USA already.
Really?
There have been, incidences. Russia's also involved. There have already been cases. It has not reached the surface yet, but it will. It's only a matter of time before that happens. And in Taiwan, you know, they weigh in the balance. It's not looking good for Taiwan right now, because every time we start mounting up patrols in certain parts to have a faster response to Taiwan, well, we have an issue with Russia, or we have an issue with China, or we have an issue in the Middle East, and we're spread out too thin right now. So nobody should be surprised if you start seeing recruiting commercials go about, and people start being called up for service in certain capacities.
Wow.
Because there are some things happening that are just unbelievable. Kind of like Zelensky, right? How do you like the idea of Zelensky going to talk to China?
I'm shocked by. I've got that right here, and I'm glad you're going to talk about this. Here it is, folks. Ukraine's Zelensky says he plans to meet with China's Xi. How does that work? I mean, when China is obviously building a coalition with Russia, I mean, what's he looking for here?
This is where sobriety comes in. People are about to witness the greatest betrayal that's ever taken place in modern history. They're about to see it. And what it will unleash is almost a guaranteed war within itself, right? The players that people are acquainted with, you know, we know them by propaganda. We know them by what other people have said. We don't know them personally. We know them by public reports and public news articles. We don't know them personally.
Right.
We're quickly about to find out that certain people portrayed an individual they are absolutely not, right? I'll say something else, that it stings a little bit, but Zelensky has already snubbed the U.S. government twice. It looks good in front of the cameras, but it's not like that behind cameras. And people are going to find out a painful truth. And it will drag us into a conflict faster, because the USA normally has to be pulled into a conflict. Normally, they have to be.
Normally, yeah. It seems like Biden and Harris have been frustrated, irritated, and really trying to beat the war drums with NATO. And are you saying that's because Zelensky's not really who he says he is?
Well, when it's all uncovered, you're going to find out that basically the Democratic government does not know how to slow down what's been started. If you take note, anybody who mentions war, right, they just smile about it, kind of downplay it. They shouldn't do that, right? No. There's a main person driving war, and it's going to keep going. Zelensky may not be who people think they are, that they think he is. And the causes of countries are going to be different.
George Soros is the guy who funded and put Zelensky in power. I mean, he was an actor. He was a comedian.
He was an actor. He was an activist for some of the new agenda things. He's still an ongoing activist for some of the new agenda things. He stands against certain policies concerning good morals. The uncovering, the unpacking of these things is going to upset people. I already know it is. But they just have to get up and dust themselves off and keep going. It should be a lesson when everything is uncovered that you really can't trust what's presented to you, right? But all a person need to do is ask Christ and wait for his answer. Because in the body of Christ is the answer. Unfortunately, the true answer to who these people are, you're not going to get it by media. You're going to get exactly what they want you to hear.
Right.
And Zelensky has been very busy. He's taking U.S. funds, right?
Yep.
And it's supposed to go to the war machine. But see, we made a mistake. You can't give somebody money without conditions. We didn't set conditions the first time.
We just gave them money.
That's right. It was under a NATO umbrella, right? That umbrella of NATO is very thin and weak. And so we can't prosecute or do anything about that, which is why we sent investigators, we sent auditors, and everybody else straight to the Ukraine to say what happened to the 80 billion. Why didn't it go on machinery? How are they out of this, that, and the other already? And so there's a breakdown in communication. Germany is asking similar questions, but Zelensky is going to take a big step, and a pretty big betrayal will come from this. So people aren't getting ready for it.
So some people, I'm hearing all kinds of rumors that some of this money that went into Ukraine didn't go for weapons, but went to prop up Zelensky's government and personally help Zelensky. And some of it, I'm hearing, may have even, unfortunately, maybe kicked back into the political world here in America. Yep. Are we hearing any of that, Mike?
Well, look at it this way. You remember when the war started?
Yeah.
Everybody started to flee, right?
Yeah. Today, 1 year ago today. Yep.
He would not, remember, he stopped people from fleeing.
Yes, I do remember.
And he said, nope, you got to pick up a weapon.
Yep.
Right?
I remember that.
Then he called people back. Then you had volunteers that came in there to fight. But they quickly found out it wasn't all it was painted to be.
No.
Money has been paid to people for propaganda on the internet by the Ukraine. So it's an ugly situation among the leaders. The people are innocent. I'll tell you that now.
Yeah.
But these governments are crooks.
They're crooks.
And so you have all these things. He will not let people out of the Ukraine, Pastor Paul. He won't. So you have people, they call it a meat grinder when they go there to the Ukraine.
Yeah.
He's not letting people out. But all this will come to a head because a new deal is about to be struck. And the Ukraine is going to try and broker something and take advantage of a pretty large sum of resources and money to try and build a bridge for their own benefit. It's not going to work out. I'm just thankful that some of the people got out and went back to Israel. Very thankful for that.
Yep.
Some of the people got out and went back to Turkey. But if you notice, the people who are going into the Ukraine, you have a lot of people from Turkey that are going. We're not talking about good citizens, but ruthless individuals who have special operations training, right? Who could care less who they kill or what they kill, just so long as they do kill. And they have rotations, have started going in and out of that place. Well, the cap is coming off of all of this. It's not working out too well. People are starting to ask questions about the money, right? Again, if they get those tanks from us, it's going to cost them $55 million a day just to run. They can't do that. Plus the Tiger tanks, right? They can't do that. It's too much money. Yeah. It's impossible. And so we have a pretty big situation forming. In the meanwhile, Putin has launched another portion of his naval forces. The Arctic is probably the safest region on the earth right now. Right now, it's the safest place on earth. No other place is safe, point blank, because everything is so contentious. And Zelensky, once he blows his whistle, it's going to cause trouble within NATO.
Yes, and that's what I figure is coming, and that's why it seems like NATO's trying to figure out a way to protect Ukraine or stay in Ukraine, but you wonder why. What is the real motivation?
It's almost like blackmail. Now, you have certain countries over there, they vehemently want Putin out of the way. They do. Yeah. Some of the larger countries like us, it's not going to hurt us if Putin stays. In fact, I'll make a small prediction. This is going to seem strange. After a time, the USA and Russia are going to join forces. After a time, they're going to join forces. Watch and see. And it'll be a lot of people around to see it. Some people won't see it. They're going to join forces. They're going to have to fight what they have given birth to. Because this war in the Ukraine has given all these assets. It's happening again. This always happens. First, we send munitions, missile defense systems, tanks. But we think we're arming the Ukraine. We're not arming the Ukraine. We're arming a component that will take control of all the assets of the Ukraine.
Didn't we just see that? Didn't we just basically see that in Afghanistan? We left all the equipment, and the Taliban is running that country. It has all the equipment, the money, and the power. And
they took a lot of that equipment, Pascal. They took a lot of that equipment and gave it right to Iran.
Yep.
They give it to Iran. So now, here we are again. So, and now we're arming the Ukraine. That is a staging area. But who eventually runs that place is just going to be a shocker. I think that it's a very sensitive subject, yes, but the cap is coming off and everybody's going to have clear knowledge of this. It's going to make some people angry. I would suggest that everybody get sober now, right? And I have a statement in my mind that anything dealing with humanity can potentially take place. But terrorism, Pascal, you don't hear that word. The reason I'm mentioning it is this. They're cushioning, or let's just say programming, the populace. I'm going to give you a scenario. We have a couple more incidents.
Okay, Lord, Tricky's been diagnosed with cancer. He's going through the cancer battle. We pray that you step in and help him out and help and do what you do, Lord. He's one of your children. So please step in and help Tricky out with his cancer. We ask for this in a loving way. We hope you do it, Lord. Thank you. Amen.
We have a couple of plane crashes from America. right?
Yep.
A couple more.
Wow, 59
This
was
makes-
white.
With a couple more factories, an increase in violence in one specific area. Right after that, you're going to hear talk of the importance or an emergency with some nuclear facility.
Yeah.
Because that's always been a primary.
I mean, we had a
target.
fire this just 2 nights ago, Mike, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. A nuclear ammunition factory has a fire. You might say, well,
Yeah, and that's depleted uranium and
Yeah.
elements like that. So that's not good. That stuff goes right into the atmosphere, right?
Yep.
Depleted uranium is bad. It has a pretty long half-life, which means people will be affected. But in this case, this nuclear problem I'm talking about is this, because this is where the complicated part comes in.
Okay.
It should be no secret that in America we have a political civil war. We have a war within the government right now. It's a very violent war. People are paying the price for this war. It will take a toll, but we're going to see it bolstered. Any type of political disagreement is always solidified with a horrific incident.
Will there be assassination? There probably already is. Maybe not high-profile people, but certainly mid-level people. There are assassinations.
Well, even right now, Pastor Paul, you have militias, right? You have militias right now who have declared that they're going to take out large portions of the Democratic Party, and you have the opposition saying that they're going to do the same to the Republican Party.
Right.
So you already have these militias who, by the way, are being financed a lot of money because they have equipment, they have vehicles, they have anti-tracers, they have GPS blocking devices and cell phone cameras and everything else you can think of.
Yep.
So these militias, some of the conversations on the radio of these militias is quite direct, it's very consistent, and it's a big deal. In fact, if people knew what certain groups in America are holding back from, public knowledge, I think everybody would go to church tonight. They wouldn't wait till tomorrow. They go tonight.
What?
And they would never let their kids back on the streets again, because you'd be surprised who's right around the corner from everybody, right?
Right.
We're not talking about a group in one state. We're talking about millions of people within America, tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in America who are ready to pay the ultimate price to establish a goal. Because here's what they're always saying, and this comes from literally tens of thousands of communications per day, that the government is gone.
Oh, this every day.
That Washington is gone. But unlike normal rhetoric, these people are ready to receive an order to move, right? They're ready to move. They're ready to do their thing en masse. So you're looking at
They're just waiting on the call.
what people say again.
They're just waiting on the call.
Yes, they are. They've been trained. They already set up the training sites. They've already filtered through quite a few people and gave them a basic training. You have ex-military personnel teaching special forces tactics. This is inside America for Americans. Northcom has a headache, right? Because they're trying to track all these things. It will most certainly blow up. They've not seen this scenario ever. Not ever. They've not seen this scenario ever.
Wow.
So we know we're going to have some type of, it's going to be a lot of problems that we tend to face. And this election year could be the deadliest election year that we've ever had coming up.
We're still,
Right.
I'm wearing,
If we last that long.
I'm wearing the pineapple shirt, Mike. I know you're the pineapple prophecy. I broke out a different one, but it's still in the fact that you've had the dream, the pineapple shirt you've been talking about,
Isn't it funny though, Pastor Paul? Isn't it funny that I had that dream, but ever since I met you, things have been spiraling out of control in the world. They've been getting progressively worse.
It's been about the last 10 years. You and I've been talking. We met each other. This last 10 years has been unbelievable. You would have to be absolutely just spiritually blind or don't want to look in the Bible, because if you sat down and read Matthew 24, or you went and read Revelation, or some other Daniel, or you want to go over to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 or somewhere, if you just start reading, you'll see what's happening right now, all over the world happening right now. Let me ask you, the people are asking, when's the next wave? Obviously, Mike, that the 18th of February, the wave you talked about was going to hit our solar system. It happened. I mean, we had an X-class 2.2 solar flare. We had a plasma vortex erupt off the sun. We had another one last night.
That's why I keep listening to Mike, because what he says happens.
early this morning, another explosion off the sun.
You're
We had
welcome,
the 10th
Tricky.
worst earthquake in the history of humanity. I think it's 49,000 are dead, and it's probably going to rise to maybe 60 probably before it's all said and done when they get everything uncovered. It's still shaking and quaking. We had a 7.2 today in Indonesia. Mike, when's the next wave? What is this? Are we done with this wave, and when's the next one?
Well, we have a few more coming up. It's a few more, not just one. It's a few more coming up. And the dates of these waves, although it's not that far off, they are of 3 different natures. They're coming from 3 different locations, these are. So they're unlike the other ones, which means I don't think we're prepared. Or the sun could totally absorb the effects of one. So in the month of March, when we take a real close look at something, because we have to, there's a small debris problem we have to deal with prior to the 15th of March, right? We actually have very small objects being tracked inbound straight into the inner solar system. And it looks like Earth is in the target. Now, here's what makes it strange. These things have a corkscrew rotation coming in. So they're not coming in a straight line. That's not what's happening. It's almost as though something very heavy was in between or in the middle of these things, and they were orbiting something, right?
Okay.
But then that heavy influence was pulled out, which means now the gravitational force of the sun is altering all those vectors, causing inertia to change within all these objects. But they're probably headed here to the Earth, that's a small, tiny cluster.
Well,
small, tiny cluster could hit the atmosphere.
We had just a couple weeks ago, we had one hit the atmosphere, blow up, hit the Earth. We only had 7 hours heads up, according to spacephoto.com. Then we had a 1,000-pound meteorite land in Texas, McAllen, Texas, 3 nights ago, 1,000-pounder. But it sounds like there's a cluster. There's a bunch of them coming headed. Looks like in our direction. There's no way to escape them all. Is that what you're saying? We don't know.
Well, this one is. Let's just say this is a pre-cluster to the actual meteor storm we're going to entertain. We will have a meteor storm, but this cluster came out of nowhere. And they're so small and they were moving in such an odd form, right, that some of the software did not really capture them. It wasn't looking for anything that moved like that. But they're most certainly coming here. The trajectories are beginning to alter, right? Because they're going to have to deal with quite a few things. They're going to have to get people off the International Space Station. They're going to have to get people behind a line of defense satellites that we have. Certain defense satellites have been very active lately. Very, very, very active lately.
Doing what? Shooting at meteorites?
Yes, they've been hitting things. We have something that's is almost like a projectile beam, you could call it, right? That when it hits an object, that object will explode and it will pulverize that object, right? As soon as it hits the atmosphere, that means most of it turns into ash and it will fall to the Earth, right? So it's just ash. The ash may be of a different nature, but it hits the ash and the ash falls in quite a big area. Like West Virginia and Maryland is having right now, white particles are falling all over the place right now as we speak. But
it's ash from space,
well, not from space, but from certain impacts that have taken place over your heads. People can't see what's happening over your heads in the daytime. This is very important because in the daytime, if we don't have a clear day, it's very difficult to see any explosions in space. Even when we have a clear day, it's very difficult to see an explosion in space. But I can guarantee you that explosions are happening all the time. There's a buildup of inbounds of both asteroids and other things are starting to build up out there too. In fact, the very nature of what these satellites are doing is spooky on one end, but it's necessary on the other. And people are soon to see all of this with their own eye. They won't need an interpreter. The problem will be, Pascal, people are going to have to deal with the effects of what's being defended, I guess you could say. You're going to have to deal with the effects of toxins coming out of the atmosphere at some point.
Let me read Revelation 8, verse 5. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. There were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. The first angel sounded, The 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. So when the first angel sounded, there followed hail, fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And a second angel sounded, and it was a great mountain, burning. The fire was cast into the sea. And the third part of the sea became blood. And then the third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died. And the third part of the ships were destroyed. And we could go on and on. So, Mike, this first part when it says the angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar cast in the earth, is this? It's almost like dust coming from off the altar, brimstone, fire, hailstone. Is that what we're talking about?
Pastor, I think when that hits, that's going to wipe out that's going to wipe out quite a few people. And I'll tell you why. Because it says all the green grass was burned up, right?
Yes.
Upon investigation, is cast out to the earth from the altar, because at the altar, the prayers of the saints were received. And then the prayers of the saints have complaints in them. Not just any complaint, but Lord, when are you coming to deal with this evil darkness on the earth? So you have all that went up to the altar, and the angel took a big scoop of that and ka-chinky, right? So for all the green grass to burn up, there was a simulation performed on this. In order for all the green grass to burn up, right? Now every landmass does not have grass. In order for all the grass to burn up, you're looking at a major portion of man dying. There's no way we can survive
right,
with all the green grass burnt up. If it all burns, that's an event that is on a scale we've not seen before. So you're looking at it at least, at least, I'd say 1/5 of humanity gone and dying that very day, that very week, or how long it takes. And I think it's not going to, I think it almost looks like these trumpets, these are all the events that you would expect from a very large inbound object.
Yes.
From a secondary star coming into our solar system. These are all the effects you would see. You would see many meteorites hitting the earth.
Yeah.
Right? Fires everywhere.
That's what
intense fires.
That's what it sounds like. Hail, fire, mingled with blood, a mountain burning, hitting the ocean. A third part of the sea becomes like blood. A third of the creatures in the sea die. A third of the ships on the oceans are destroyed. And then a third angel sounds, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers and the fountains of waters. And the name of that star is called wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, or poisonous, or radiation, or bitter. Many men died of the waters because they're made bitter. So you're saying it's a process of meteorites falling, big rocks, little rocks, hailstones, and are radioactive apparently. This is a process. And you're saying this sounds like the evidence of a binary system going by. Shaking the heavens. Well, here's a question. I've got for you an article. This just came out 12 hours before this broadcast tonight. Massive forbidden planet orbits a strangely tiny star, only 4 times its size. So what they're trying to say here is, okay, 2 weeks ago it was called Planet 9. Now we're talking about a forbidden planet. And then it goes on to say it's sort of like a dwarf star. Is this soft disclosure? Are we slowly, softly telling the earth that something's going to happen, something's happening, Mike?
Well, it almost seems like they're conditioning the people, so they won't totally be the blame for it. If something were to happen to the earth right now, right, people, they'd be out for blood because it would kill their relatives. You know, people have families, and several parts of the earth are going to be highly affected, which means people are going to say, well, they didn't tell us about this. Who didn't tell us? Your government didn't. And then that means all those associated with government will not be able to come out of their homes or the White House, right? Because people are at the tipping point right now. If they storm the White House during the election season, what do you think they'll do? If meteorites come in that they can most certainly see, right?
And nobody told
them. And it strikes homes and it's killing people, and nobody told them anything. So let's take this a bit further.
Okay.
If something were to come and the government didn't tell anybody, people would be angry unless they believed the government had no ability to see it. Now, how would they convince people that they have no ability to see meteorites coming in, maybe not being able to spot a balloon and to identify it, right?
So you start by the balloon, say, we didn't even see it. We didn't know it was there till some photographer in Montana saw it. You're telling me, Mike, that all these satellites and all of this infrared and James Webb Telescope and the Hubble and all these sophisticated military apparatuses of intelligence couldn't see a floating balloon, but some little journalist in freaking Montana, he could see it.
That's very
they're dumbing us down, right?
Is that what they're doing? Because I'll tell you what, when that balloon story popped out, when 41 balloons were flying over and they announced they don't know what it is, are you kidding me?
41.
They don't know what it is. That was highly disturbing to find out that they said to people they did not know what it was. They didn't know what it was or who it was from. That was very disturbing because I know that was a big 100%. That was a 3,000% lie.
Yeah.
But if they're saying they can't track a balloon or they can't tell the identity, even the balloon that they blew up, that was a civilian balloon. That was purposed, Pastor Paul.
Yeah.
You don't engage a civilian balloon from a Gen 5 fighter or Gen 3 fighter, right, and not know what it is.
That's ludicrous.
They did that because people instantly they can see social media too. They can track social media. Right after they did that, they said, we don't have the systems that everybody said we had because they can't even shoot down. They shot 2 missiles, not one, at a cost of $532,000 per missile. They shot 2 of them.
Canada couldn't even hit it.
$60 balloon.
Canada said, thank you. We couldn't get it. We weren't capable. So in other words, they're lying to us. They're saying they don't have the capabilities. Canada can't.
They are lying. That is a lie. That's a lie, Pascal, because you could throw a quarter in the air, right? If you dropped a quarter out of an aircraft, right, and they release a Patriot missile, it would take that quarter out. Okay, so how could they not hit a balloon? And in the missile systems on an aircraft, right? This is, we're not talking about a Vietnam era. Missile pods. That's not what we're talking about. Guided munitions, right? That will track a target, heat or not, and just kill it. You're not talking about some archaic weapon without guidance, right? These systems have very sophisticated guidance systems on there, and they're equipped with AI. So, but the public bought it, didn't they? Not one person came on social media and disputed the fact that they could not target lock these balloons. They didn't say they got to be lying because our equipment can track that. Nobody came out to say that. And that's very disturbing to me. Because if people believe that, they're not going to blame the government when a bunch of things fall into their homes and set the grounds on fire.
No.
Right?
They're not.
They're not. And Texas, I hate to say it, but when this happens, Texas is the last place I'm going to want to be because of what's underneath the ground.
What's underneath the water? Oh, because the oil? Because the oil and gas?
They're not kept. There was a conversation back in 1992 about some of the piping that's underneath Texas all throughout the state. It's almost like it was purposely neglected, tied up with bureaucracy. If something hits in Texas, it will expand the fire that's already started underneath the ground. There's already a fire underneath the ground in Texas.
Whoa.
Number one, there's already a fire. That won't go out. It will not go out.
The fire's burning up.
I don't know what happened then, guys. Hang on. I don't know what happened then.
Texas, and it won't go out. And
it won't go out.
Nobody's telling us about the fire burning under Texas.
No, they're not going to tell you about the fire. They're going to try to. They have the Army Corps of Engineers, right? Places like Fort Hood and those places around Fort Hood, Killeen, Texas, all those places. They're going to take care of some of those burning areas. But you're looking, if something were to crash into the top side with the erosion that we've had from weather and rain, excessive moisture, right? It's going to collapse. And when it collapses, that fire is coming up topside. But you have pipelines down below the ground. You have big lines of oil that go out to the coasts to fill up the tankers and everything else. If Texas is hit, that's going to be a catastrophe. That'll be a big catastrophe because they'll have fires from above and below.
What part of
Right,
Texas?
and below.
Mike? What part of Texas?
That's in, if you are east in Texas, going like Galveston and those places, going all the way up that coastline where the refineries are with the nuclear facilities, up to more refineries, going up to north. That would pretty much do. Now, the western side of
Tricky, we're a bad influence on you, mate. We keep you up all night. Okay, brother. See you tomorrow. God bless.
Texas would not be touched. Well,
Okay.
not so much. But the parts that are highly occupied, they don't have a chance. They don't have a chance because they're not taking care of what's underneath the ground. They're just not.
Well, are we talking magma now rising up toward the gas?
It doesn't even have to rise that far to hit some of those oil lines, oil tanks, and everything else. They have got to. How can they address this? This was built many different years ago, and nobody really counted on revelation happening, right now, or anything from space penetrating into the ground. But like when they say that meteorite fell into Texas, we actually have 4 that struck the USA. It didn't strike anywhere else, just the USA.
Yeah, I know.
And so we have issues and problems that are compounding themselves, and it's only a matter of time. In other words, in order for a big destructive event to take place, we do not need the war machine to do it. We don't need somebody to commit espionage. We don't need terrorism. It could be a small meteorite that hits in the right place, right there in Texas and other places, by the way, who also have these pipelines. New York, they're in big trouble because they can't take care of their failing systems. The piping is too numerous, too many people. You can't work around those people. And if something were to hit New York, the story's over. It's over. That's going to be.
So is this okay? Back to the balloon for a second. Okay, and then I want you to continue on with the story about what's under New York, what's under all these locations. Is the balloon looking for locations to hit us that could? I mean, for instance, if you were Russia or China or somebody, and you had the ability to drop a tactical nuke on Yellowstone, or maybe Texas, maybe it's East Texas, like what you're talking about. I mean, are they analyzing this stuff? They can surely do it from space. They don't need
Well, they can do that they can do it from space.
Yeah.
And we've already been hacked numerous times to get our info. Anything that we can see, that we can deduce from what's available online, so can they, right? They can do the same thing. So just think about that. And they already have satellites in space.
Yeah.
They have probes orbiting the moon. They have a craft on the moon. This is China. So they already have intelligence. They already have that. There are co-op satellites that we have with China in space. So and there's a degree of information we share always, right, for that mutual existence policy. But to send a balloon, for what reason? That's the funny part, because they know we have the capability, like when the first one came over, right? As soon as it transmitted in pulses. We snagged all that data and found out exactly what it was doing, right? So it was a game of charades was the rest of it. Oh, we got to go get it, right? Because how could a guy know exactly what they were going to do the day before they did it? Yeah. I mean, exactly to a T, right? And name it, and it was archived and everything. So how can somebody know that? And then they get out to sea and act like they have to bring in Navy divers to recover it. Are you kidding? They have people on standby. They have to do that. So they're convincing people that they don't have the capability to see things in the sky like people want.
They want us to believe that so that way, as we get hit with more meteorites and rocks,
we won't go looking for blood from them.
Right. We won't be hunting them down because
that's right. Also, one more thing.
Yep.
One more thing. They came out with this, the first balloon, that was legitimate, right? Yeah. That was a very legitimate issue. That was China's stuff. You can look at China's, if I'm not mistaken, that same satellite, the exact same satellite is archived on some of the Chinese file systems online that you have access to check out some of their, equipment. That balloon is there. It's theirs. But the other balloons, Fastball, they came out with this UFO disclosure stuff, right? Which was not disclosure. They came out with these reports that didn't pick up the momentum they thought. It just didn't. It was on fire for about, I don't know, a couple of days, and then it died down, right? They're saying because of Christians. Anyway, it died down. Nobody was interested. Nobody was looking up. Nobody. So this first balloon goes over and people were looking up, but then they instantly stop. Not a lot of people are looking up. They don't have expectations. All of a sudden, you see a bunch of balloons all over the world flying, right?
Yeah.
All over the world.
Weird
now,
objects.
guess what happened?
Okay.
Guess what happened? After they shot down the second balloon, UFO sightings went up 2,000%. And that means they have people's attention to look up again.
To find
Oh,
UFOs, to watch for these weird.
That's right. That's right.
wow.
And it's sparking more stories, more of this, that, and the other. Now, in the spiritual realm,
Wow. So he's saying the balloons were to make people look up so they can see the UFOs. And there's been 2,000 UFOs since the balloons were spotted. Wow.
Satan can't do it. Satan can't do anything. Demons can't do anything unless we empower them to do it.
That's right.
A very real thing. We have to empower. In order for us to empower something like that, or empower Satan to come in our front door, we have to have a desire behind some of his stuff. If a person does not, that's like the Bible says a man is drawn away and tempted of his own lust.
Yes.
So if it's not within us, we're not going to go for it. We
Yeah.
can't be tempted into doing anything. But if a desire could be created in us to ask questions, to be inquisitive, to want to see them, because that's exactly what's happening now. People say, well, I want to see it. And they have no idea what they're asking. But they want to see it. They want to experience it. And in every single case, they say it's exciting. It's the most exciting thing that happened in my life.
Yes.
Because they don't understand when these things get around, they can jolt your spirit. In other words, they can make you feel, it's almost like a feeling of euphoria.
Right.
It's a good feeling, which will lock a person into forever pursuing them. And they won't really pay attention to what they're doing to themselves. Well, they got to get this going before June and July hits. They need a strong desire within people to know more about these things.
Okay, so now
before June and July.
Okay, now before June, July. But now you mentioned March 15th. Is that the date of the next wave of energy? I know you're saying there's some stuff.
March 15 is an oddball pulse coming up from behind us. It's not even from our galaxy. It's very old. It's coming up from.
So
behind
it's not
us.
from the binary system. This is a.
This one is not March 15th. No.
Do you expect it to do anything to the sun, or will it hit us?
I have no idea. I have no idea, Pastor Paul.
Okay.
It's coming up from behind us.
Okay.
Right. So it's going to be coming up where most of the solar winds naturally travel. So it'll face a lot of opposition getting through those solar winds. I do suspect, however, that we're going to see a change in the sun. And it could be a violent change in the sun, right? Because we're having a pulse from a direction that's opposite inertia. So if it's strong enough to take effect on the sun, then instead of flares being shot out on the back of the sun, we're going to see flares shot out facing us.
That's not good. That's not good at all.
Not good at all. So
this is March 15th is when the pulse
Yes.
is expected. So so March 15, 16, 17, let's say 72-hour period, we should really watch and see what may develop from that. We're not sure. This is
right.
But you're saying before March 15th, there's some rocks coming, some meteorites. There's some.
Yes, and that's being tracked very closely, Pastor. Also, that's one of those developing things, and
Okay.
I'll certainly know more as the days
Now,
continue.
June and July, just because you mentioned it, they got to get the public reconditioned to believing that they don't have as much capability as we thought they did. Keep us looking up for balloons and UFOs because of what's coming in June and July. So, what are you anticipating? Are we talking about now the water event coming, the big event?
No, not the water event.
Okay.
No, this is part of the this kingdom event, I guess you could say. A couple of declarations.
Okay.
A couple of ceremonies going to take place before June and July, right?
Okay.
What that could be, it could be a dedication of Moloch. It could be a dedication to Baal. We don't know yet.
So so something on a global scale that's on a pagan scale, on a global scale, the world is going to embrace. I'm talking about the world leaders now.
They're on board.
Yeah.
They're on board. They're already on board.
Okay, so we should watch for some kind of big announcement. Who do you think is going to make it? Is it coming out of?
Well, I think I seriously think it's going to be information, and the public they kind of make a noise. They make noise over whatever they find anyway. I think that this will take off with the public. The public will begin to share, and so begins the anti-faith movement. in a lot of areas.
Anti-faith, boy, that's bad. Wow, Mike. Wow. Look, there's so much going on, and I mean, you took time out from the Friday night to come here. I always appreciate this because it's really a great show. We talked about these 4 horsemen for a reason, because it seems as if every one of these are, without question, they're out of the stall, like we said earlier. They're galloping, and they seem to be getting faster. Everything is happening at an accelerated rate to the coming of the Lord, and so people need to be aware. They need, and the Bible told us so, Mike, as you know. But we're not to be troubled. We're not to be afraid. We're not to live in fear. We got to live in faith, right, Mike?
That's right, because it's our Savior. He's
in charge.
We have a good Father, right? We
Right.
have a good Father. A good Father is not going to expose his own family to anything that family cannot handle.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
If the kids are dressed and it's cold outside, he's not going to open the door and tell everybody has a coat on.
Right.
Right? So we should keep that in mind. Whatever the Lord allows to take place on it, because he's the only one worthy to open the seals. He's the only, nobody else can do it. So he's opening the seals in accordance to our preparedness, our true preparedness. So I guess the next step would be for us to be sincere in our following of him. And Lord knows there's a lot of things we have to quickly work out.
Well, it felt
within ourselves.
good to see this 12-day revival at Asbury College here in Lexington, and I understand it's spread into about 20 other college campuses. My question is why this thing ended so abruptly. Because I know this, it's so hard to get a revival movement going. The last thing I would do if I had a revival break loose and where people wanted to worship 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 12 straight days, is shut the thing down. Do you feel that the college institutions could be getting some pressure not to let a youth revival take off in America?
Pastor, I think that the people appointed to these universities are crooked. That's what I think. I think they're compromised. Amen. They're crooked, and they don't want Christ. Christ is being fought right now, that belief within people. The Antichrist cannot rise in the presence of the Holy Spirit, right? So people, some are going to have to fall away. They're going to fight Christianity tooth and nail.
Yeah.
Nobody should. But you know what? I'll never stop fighting. I only have one speed: fast and forward.
Fast and furious.
I don't back up for anything else. So
Fast and furious, Mike. Come on.
there we are with that.
We're out running the horses right now. We're out running the horses. Mike. Oh, man. I love you, Mike. I love you. All right, Mike. Hey, God bless you, brother. Thanks for coming on, being with us tonight. Thanks for taking a Friday night instead of a Thursday. But Lord willing, we'll see you. What should we look for next Thursday night, Mike? Anything we should keep an eye on?
Yeah, people.
People. Just watch what people.
Keep an eye on people. Probably riots and protests.
Yeah, watch out for people.
Watch out for people.
Yeah, don't fall for it. Don't fall. If anybody ever sees, I'll say one thing because I told COT this. If you see a woman laid out in the street, he has a big hat on, a big white hat on, big brimmed hat. Don't fall for the story as to why she's laying in the street. Don't do that. Now I can't go into detail or anything else, but if you see that on TV, like a woman got shot and she's in the street or something to that nature, she died right there in the street. Don't go for whatever they're going to say behind this. Don't believe it. It's 100% made up, and it's going to lead people in a very wrong direction. Don't buy it. Please don't buy it. I'll probably explain after it happens. I know it sounds like an enigma right now, but it won't be when it takes place.
All right. We'll keep an eye on this. We'll watch for it. And we thank you for giving us a heads up on it. We'll continue to keep an eye on what's going on. So bless you, Mike. Thank you so much. I mean,
we'll go back to Tom Horn.
Explain civilization from its supernatural origin and the supernatural attack that Lucifer, who hates mankind with a passion, even those people who are listening to this broadcast tonight, who have yielded themselves, could quote the dark side, they don't understand. In the end, they end up destroyed. And so, I would encourage everyone that has gotten questions, absolutely. And by the way, I still recommend it's an important book for people to understand when Tom, when did you write the Armand Gate?
I don't know, 7, 8 years ago.
7, 8 years ago, because that's when Tom introduced me to the gates of hell, the statement of Jesus, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it, the church that he's building on faith. And the point that was interesting to me is from that point on, Tom, everything flowed furiously in the way of information on stargates, on CERN, the UFO visible presence, not 1 or 2, 3 people seeing triangular spacecraft, but literally thousands, if not 10,000. So I believe that people have to understand we're doing this so that you're not destroyed, so that you're not deceived. And Tom, I don't know if you know this, but 20 years ago on one of my first talk radio programs, I said there is coming a war in the Catholic Church between the traditionalists and the neo-Catholics who will try to bring in strange doctrine. And you put it on the top of Raiders News. Christians will not immediately need to renounce their faith in God, simply on the basis of the reception of this new, unexpected information of a religious character from extraterrestrial civilizations. However, once the religious content originating from outside the earth has been verified, they will have to conduct a rereading of the gospel, inclusive of the new data. Heresy will not be if you believe against the standard tradition. Heresy will be, as you guys just explained, if you don't accept the alien saviors, you don't deserve to live because you have not evolved to a higher form of consciousness. And that is where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. So please, by all means, if you don't understand how important this is, it is the critical bit of information for the time. And I know a couple of pastors, God bless you, Bruce, God bless you, Susan, people that are listening to us, pastors who are teaching their congregation, as Marcus, others of you out there, and I don't know all of you by name, but the bottom line is I salute you, men and women of God, who are not afraid to bring truth to the people that God has given you shepherding over. And Tom and Chris, I want to thank you guys, because basically, as one icebreaker to another, enjoy the ice, gentlemen, because it only gets harder and more frozen from here.
Steve, in the lead up to a recent Vatican-sponsored conference on astrobiology, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who's one of the top astronomers, he's a director of the Vatican Observatory, he made it clear that accepting the reality of intelligent aliens not only doesn't contradict the Catholic faith, but that to believe otherwise is the real heresy, because it puts limits on God's creative freedom. Now, there's a lot behind that. In fact, even the language that he used was identified by Daniel Sheehan, who served for 10 years as the general counsel to the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., identified by him as dating back to 1277, having to do with edicts of the Catholic Church. And so we won't have time tonight to get into all those details, but the bottom line is what's happening in Rome now. There's a definite agenda that tomorrow MSNBC is going to admit that Chris Putnam and I were right a year ago, having to do with what was happening in Rome, that we called it a Machiavellian manipulation, that there was a war going on with the College of Cardinals jockeying for positions to try to become, to try to either promote their candidate or be the candidate for Petrus Romanus. And we, of course, we knew that all along, and most of the people that follow us knew that we were telling the truth, but the media was denying it. Well, it'll be admitted tomorrow. But, and in fact, I got a contact today that Piers Morgan might want me to come on and explain things to him. I don't even know if I want to do that.
But I wouldn't do it. You're wasting your time, Tom.
But here's the deal.
I don't think he'd understand.
But here's the deal. There is now a manipulation that has to do with the power brokers in Rome, and exactly what is happening now that has to do with the election of the next pope, the final pope, and what that has to do with end times prophecy and the plans by occultists. One of the most astonishing things in Petrus Romanus was Chris Putnam digging around in these old libraries and coming across the prophecies of Rene Thibault over 60 years ago, telling us that the Vatican was going to follow a specific pattern, and that the Pope would step down in March or April of 2012, and Petrus Romanus would be elected. Exactly what they did. He told us exactly how that would happen. He died right after his book came out, so it went out of print. Chris found it, translated it from French into English. Well, guess what? Now we're in possession of a second book, another rare book written in French. Chris found it once again. This is a book that's called The Eclipse of the Church, or it can also be translated as The Church Overshadowed. But guess what? This one has Malachi Martin in it. And in this book, he testifies. He gives this affidavit that Pope John the 23rd and Pope Paul the 6th were secret Freemasons. And he says that detailed documents, photographs, proving that fact, were in possession of the Vatican State Secretariat. Well, guess who that was at that time? It was Angelo Sodano, who's in the top 10 contenders right now for Petrus Romanus. But he was, we speculated that he was one of the manipulators behind the VatiLeaks scandal. And since we've been, verified that that was a fact. Sodano is an Italian cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church, but he's the current dean of the College of Cardinals. And he's the former Cardinal Secretary of State. So this is a very influential, powerful individual who is going to influence the current conclave towards who will be elected to be Petrus Romanus. And most Vatican sources now are admitting that there was a real, and so far, undisclosed, the story hasn't been told, right, behind VatiLeaks, that it was an internal campaign, just like we said it was, involving Machiavellian manipulation, maneuverings, playing out behind the scenes. And most of this targeted toward the Secretary of State, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. Now, recall that originally we kind of almost fascinated about his name, Cardinal Tarcisio Peter Bertone, who was born in Romano. So, I mean, this guy's name, it just seemed to be such a perfect fit for Petrus Romanus that, even though there were other parts about him, his age, other things that made us think he probably wouldn't be the next Pope, but he is the Carmelingo. And this could set in motion something strange. It probably won't happen, but it could, because the Carmelingo, as of today, in fact, Jerome Corsi called me and he said, "Tell me, Tom, technically speaking, the minute that Ratzinger steps aside, who is the de facto Pope?" And I said, "Well, it would be the Carmelingo. It's Peter Bertone." And so he wrote that whole article for WorldNet Daily that Petrus Romanus is, he's going to be standing in the position of the final Pope here, within the next few weeks.
You know what I was thinking? If Pope Benedict stepped down kind of secretly and unofficially last March, like they're saying, for all we know, Bertone has been running this show since April.
Well, no, that's absolutely true. And he and Ratzinger, or Pope Benedict, they have a long history between the two of them. And in fact, in February of last year, when some of the cardinals were, or when some of the Catholic priests were raised to the position of cardinal and they were given their red hats and whatever, we made a note at that time that most of them were Italians, and most of the cardinal electors will be Italians. And by the way, that also could play into this. If you had a pope who was named Peter, for instance, let's say Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana, who is the #1 contender right now Odds makers are giving him the #1 position to be the next pope. By the way, I think he's hurt his chances. He was out there yesterday and today in the media saying that if the Lord wanted him to have the position, he's ready. Well, guess what? Among the cardinal electors, they don't like that. When you're out there in the media and you seem like you're kind of politicking for the position, that can actually work against you, and sometimes very strongly. So he might have shot himself in the head as far as being a potential candidate for Petrus Romanus, but his name is Peter, and if he got elected, then he would of course be Peter the Roman. But this could come around in ways that we can't yet even begin to see. It could be the name that when somebody's elected to be pope, they change their name. It could be the name they take. So I would not, I have a top 10 list, but I'm perfectly fine with nobody in my top 10 list being elected. It's really not going to matter. He's the last one on the list. He's Petrus Romanus in the prophetic sense of the word. And now, if he is also the false prophet in the biblical sense of the word, boy, there's some astonishing stuff we need to talk about. And I want to tell people, when I wrote the book, Apollyon Rising 2012, I wrote in that book, and I've also said since, that what all of these desperate prophecies were saying is that something would begin in 2012. Now, do I believe that something began in 2012? I don't even look at prophecy that way. I don't try to nail down dates. I'm not a date setter. What I was looking at is what all these other ancient occultic and even American occultic sources were pointing to the year 2012. Well, I'm wrestling to get through this current work. You know why? Because I have got to go now, and I'm going to I'm going to add 200 pages of material to the book Apollyon Rising 2012, because there's equally astonishing information that's just flabbergasting to me. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to say this on the radio tonight. Here's what I'm going to do. I started a contest, right? Some couple of years ago, 3 years ago, whenever I released Apollyon Rising 2012, and we were going to give away $10,000 and an enigmatic item. Then my house burned down. Almost immediately, Steve Quayle called me, talked to me about popping sounds, which I had heard. And I may talk about some of that in the book, something very strange, and maybe Steve will add something to this, because he'll verify what I'm telling you now is true. There's something very strange happened. The house burned to the ground. We lost everything, but we also lost the enigmatic item. Well, I'm going to say what the enigmatic item was in the re-release of Apollyon Rising 2012. It's going to be called Apex 2016, and you'll understand why when we release it. But I'm going to finish that contest, and there's only going to be one code. It's going to be one code in that book, and it's going to be easy. And the minute it comes out, the first person that calls a phone number that I set up, I'm going to give them $10,000, and I'll tell you why I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it because it'll make news, and when it makes news, I then will be able to capture a very large audience of individuals around the world, so that I will have a public forum in order to be able to say something about the current American administration and what's happening right now. And I can hardly imagine getting this information out there in time before all of this transpires. But it's related to what's going on in Rome right now, the prophecy of the popes. Ladies and gentlemen, there is absolutely extraordinary. It will chill some people to the bone, but it's going to make true Christians exhilarated, because I believe, I'm convinced, it points to the imminent return of Jesus Christ. The very thing that Steve Quayle was talking about earlier, where he said, the text refers to the fall of Lucifer like lightning, but it also talks about those who have the power to tread upon serpents and scorpions.
Fantastic. Wow. Mr. Putnam, do you have anything to add? You want to chime in here?
that's kind of a hard act to follow there.
Yeah, I would say so. But holy cow! But go ahead.
Well, I mean, one thing that's terribly interesting about Apollyon Rising that Tom was bringing up, you know, in researching this new book, Exo Vaticana, you know, I talked about earlier, you know, I talked about there was a massive UFO flap over Rome in 1978, the year of 3 popes. You know, that's just kind of a crazy coincidence, you know. But something else I uncovered in this research pointed to some of the things that Tom was talking about in Apollyon Rising. Now, if you remember, anyone that's read Apollyon Rising will remember that Tom points out the occultic architecture that parallels Washington, D.C. and Rome, in that both have an Egyptian obelisk, which is like a male fertility symbol, and both have a dome right across from it, and, you know, which seems to be the feminine aspect. So, you know, we have both of these in parallel locations. Now, you know, this is suggestive that something's going on. Well, I found a UFO story that parallels Rome and Washington, D.C., and it's the most bizarre thing. And it was actually seen by an Italian diplomat, an official in the Italian government is one of the eyewitnesses, and it was witnessed by hundreds of people. And I've got the accounts in the book. It actually made some of the older issues of Flying Saucer Review, a British magazine. And what he saw were flying formations of these like orb-like UFOs over the Vatican. They formed like a cross or an X, and they actually came together and made an X and then flew apart. And there was just like apparently just a whole slew of these things. Hundreds of people saw it. It was widely reported. It was in the newspaper in Italy. Well, just like, I think it was either the same day or 2 days later, I don't have it in front of me right now, but just at the exact same time in Washington, D.C., I quote a military official who was working for the CIA, okay, official source, you know, not somebody that's just going to make up crazy stuff. And he saw the same pattern in the sky over Washington, D.C. at the exact same time. I don't know what to make of that, you know, but what I was doing was looking through history, looking through old UFO reports and correlating them to certain events. So yeah, we have a U.S. Navy commander, Alvin E. Moore, working for the Scientific Intelligence Department of the CIA. Now here was his testimony, and I'll just read it out loud for you. When I left the office at 5 p.m., I saw in the western half of the sky, and mainly in the southwestern quadrant, above the long, narrow, horizontal sky ribbon, 2 huge X's or crosses of pearly white vapor. I thought that in the medieval days, an observer of such a huge cross in the sky probably would have considered them an omen. They looked, however, more like X's than crosses, having right-angle parts, and I concluded that each of the 4 flying saucer emissions of propulsion materials had crossed another to form X's above the horizontal ribbon, like line of gas or vapor. Okay, this is a U.S. Navy official working for the CIA. This is his testimony of what he saw November 9th, 1954, over the U.S. Capitol building. At the same time, over the Vatican, we have the same thing seen by a government official, a diplomat, the Italian government, the same time. You know, does that play into Tom's occultic architecture between the dome and the obelisk? You know, I think that maybe it does, because these happen at the same time and it's the same pattern. It's very kind of perplexing to try to figure out what's going on, but I think that this might have been some kind of dress rehearsal for what Tom talks about in Apollyon Rising.
Wow. Well, I concur with that. And
one of the things I think that most people don't know, and a lot of people get mad at me when I say this, but it's without historic argument. The whole point of obelisks is to venerate and actually commemorate the fallen angels the first time when they came unto earth, women, and produced the giants. In other words, it's a giant phallic symbol. All of the dolmens and menhirs, all the rocks and that are stacked on each other. Stonehenge is the biggest example. Karnak. All these things are basically in our face billboards as to basically not saying Kilroy was here, but Azazel was here, and that's just one of the fallen angels. So what's interesting to me now is when Chris is talking about the parallel positioning of those saucers and the X marks the spot. I think it's interesting that these entities have a way of always wanting to rub in the faces of the people that they basically deflowered in antiquity, the fact that they're back and what they couldn't pull off before, they're going to try and pull off again. And that's what is going to bring war on earth in multi-dimensions that most people have never even embraced. And that's, again, why it is so important for people to grasp this. Tom doesn't write books. Chris doesn't write books. They don't do what they do, and I don't do what I do to basically give somebody something better to do than to turn on the Sci-Fi Channel. We are tasked with this. We have been commissioned by the living God. God's word says his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, not because they aren't presented with the knowledge, but because they reject the knowledge. So what I tell people who are listening to this stuff and going, man, those guys are out there. Yeah, we are out there because God put us out there to show you what lies ahead. Putting us out there means in the future. So once the future becomes a present for those who lived in such a state of denial or fear or contempt for the messengers, that you're not destroyed. And I tell everybody, Doug, the basis of all survival is the right mindset. And when Jesus gives us...
Okay, guys, I've got to go. I've got things to do.